As Germany reports the highest number of daily deaths since the pandemic began. Matt?
All right, let's take a look at the futures. And we have futures pointing higher here in Europe, as well as U.S. futures. So it does look like we're going to be risk on this morning, although you don't see, incredibly substantial numbers here, 0.25%, 0.1%. You do see, though, other indicators. Investors are willing to let go of debt. The 10-year yield is rising, and they're selling the dollar as well. So let's take a look at European markets as they open up live. This is the global macro movers screen, and the far left-hand column are the equity indexes. I keep telling Hillary, we need to change that. It's Bloomberg style is indexes. We've got to talk to the programmers and get this switched over. In any case, as they open up live, that will populate. And I will say to the programmers, this was a genius move, this screen. I absolutely love using GMM Go on the Bloomberg. The CAC Quarant opens up 0.25%, a little bit more. The IBEX gaining 0.3% as they open. The FTSE little changed, but at least in positive territory as investors are a little more optimistic on Joe Biden's inauguration day. He will become the 46th U.S. president just hours from now. The swearing-in ceremony, though, will be unlike any other in American history, taking place against the backdrop of a raging pandemic and profound political divisions across the country. The streets of Washington, D.C. have been sealed off, and concrete slabs are blocking the central area due to fears of a potential attack on America's capital from armed American people. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Stephanie Baker. And Stephanie, it's, even saying that out loud, it just sounds so strange and frankly a little bit scary. What should we expect from today's inauguration?
Right. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. It is going to be a peaceful transfer of power, but it's not going to feel or look like it given the heavy military presence in Washington and the fact that Trump will be the first president in more than 150 years to not attend the inauguration as a sort of symbol of this peaceful transfer of power. It will be a much smaller affair than inaugurations in the past. About 1,000 people are expected to attend, socially distanced, but it will be a much more star-studded affair than Trump's inauguration. Lady Gaga and Jennifer Lopez will perform. There will be no inaugural ball or parade. Instead, there'll be a virtual parade featuring, I love this one, Earth, Wind, and Fire, and a virtual evening celebration hosted by Tom Hanks and Eva Longoria. And I think that the theme of Biden's speech has been flagged as, similar to what his campaign was, about unity and I think about healing, which is something he touched on in that memorial address last night when he said, to heal, you have to remember. And I think that will be the ongoing theme of the day.
It'll be really interesting to witness this very different ceremony then. Far fewer people, but J-Lo, Tom Hanks, so certainly some celebrity sprinkled across these events then, Stephanie. What about Joe Biden's first days in office? What are we expecting his priorities to be?
Right. Well, he's expected to issue a raft of executive orders, including rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, rescinding the Muslim travel ban. He plans to issue a mask mandate on federal property and any kind of interstate travel. And I think other things is within his power to do to help with the COVID pandemic, like extending restrictions on home evictions and foreclosures and continuing the pause on student loans. He'll send up some legislation to Congress, including on immigration reform and, of course, the stimulus package, which we saw yesterday, his pick for Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen highlighting the need for big action to respond to the COVID pandemic. And she pushed back against Republican senators who questioned her about, concerns about this adding to debt levels, saying the country really needs a strong stimulus package to get the economy moving again.
Stephanie, this morning, Trump pardoned, or late last night, I guess, in America, over 70 individuals. This is not unusual, and there are often, controversial figures. Roger Clinton was pardoned by his brother. Mark Rich was pardoned by Bill Clinton as well. What I find even more fascinating is an executive order by the president who pledged to drain the swamp that allows his political appointees to lobby immediately starting, today at noon, New York time. What kind of change is this for the Trump administration?
Yes, that was extraordinary that he did that after pardoning, more than 70 people, many of them close associates who had been indicted and charged and convicted with acts of corruption. Of course, Steve Bannon was on the list. He'd only been indicted and pleaded guilty to basically using money that he had raised from Trump supporters for building the wall and using some of that money for his own $1 million for his own personal expenses. But I think the revoking of this ethics order by Trump, freeing these aides to freely lobby government, I think was quite extraordinary and really was the sort of ultimate final act of the Trump administration, which promised to drain the swamp, but made it was as swampy as any administration in living memory.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Good to speak to you this morning. We look ahead to our coverage of the inauguration later on Bloomberg TV. Thanks very much, Stephanie Baker, joining us there with a look ahead to what we can expect. Let's get a market perspective. Joining us now, Vincent Juvens, a global market strategist at JP Morgan Asset Management. Vincent, very good to speak to you this morning. We look ahead then to the inauguration. We anticipate a big fiscal stimulus package. We heard a lot about that from Janet Yellen yesterday. Where would you see the best investment opportunities when it comes to US stocks at this point, at the levels, at the valuations that we've reached? Where would you see the best opportunities in the US?
I guess everyone expects a lot from Joe Biden's administration, but looking at what is likely and looking at the executive orders which will be issued in the coming days, looking at the rescue package, which obviously has been unveiled over the last couple of hours, I would expect a massive boost to the U.S. economy through the rescue package, later on through the infrastructure plan. So I would expect that corporate America will definitely perform well in this environment, and probably more small caps than large cap in this environment. If you invest again in the US, and I'm thinking maybe more about its infrastructure plan, if you want to build new bridge, repair the road, establish new train junction, insulate all real estate in the US, this will be a major opportunity for US small cap, I believe, in the US.
Vincent, have we not seen small cap prices run too far, too fast? I mean, there's been already a lot of optimism out there, and I'm wondering if earnings are going to be able to justify the prices.
No, definitely. You're entirely right. Nothing is cheap these days, and a lot of what we can expect is priced in. And as a European investor, I'm particularly interested in also in the climate agenda of Joe Biden, and we will have several executive order, hopefully in the coming days, going into that direction. And we have seen the effect in Europe as well, where the utility sector, the renewable sector, also perform quite well in this context. So definitely valuation are a headwind, but investors need to look to get some. We have already a lot of forward guidance from the central bank, but we need to get some form of, let's say, fiscal guidance, where the government are heading to. And as investor, I guess that with both fiscal and forward guidance, we can follow the path of policymaker, and that will still be very positive from an investment standpoint. But the JP Morgan Asset Management of this world are paid actually to make the difference between highly evaluated stock and attractively evaluated stock. So for active player, this is definitely an opportunity for us to distinguish those sector, those stock which will benefit the most from what will be decided in Washington. And the good thing, a lot is happening. There are a lot of expectations, but we try to already to anticipate to those movements, and this will be beneficial not only for say the U.S. economy, U.S. Corporate sector, but this has implications far beyond the U.S. and we can discuss later on what the possible impact could be in emerging market, China or Europe, obviously.
And are you nervous at all, Vincent, about debt levels in the United States? We heard Janet Yellen being asked about this by Republican senators yesterday. She pushed back, saying interest rates are really low. You have to go big. That was one of the lessons of the last financial crisis. And she pointed to a drop in debt servicing costs. You can see that on the right-hand side in the white. A drop in debt servicing costs of late because of low interest rates. The red circles outlining where we saw Trump tax cuts taking effect. But in terms of the pandemic fight, we've seen low interest rates and therefore debt servicing costs coming down. Does that mean that the US can afford to go out and spend big, Vincent?
First, we should all be concerned by debt level. We have probably the highest debt level in the developed world as we have had since World War II. So we should all be concerned about it and make sure this remains manageable. And as you alluded to, Anna, the key at the moment is debt servicing costs. Central bank have engineered low debt servicing costs, and it is sustainable at the moment. This set will likely with this rescue package, with the stimulus, with the infrastructure package, which is about to come, with similar measure taking in Europe, for instance, to see more debt as we go into 2021 and beyond. But we need to distinguish between what I would call bad and good debt. Good debt is the kind of debt which repay itself. If we invest in future growth, and I'm quite enthusiastic about the infrastructure plan or the climate agenda of Joe Biden, which hopefully should drive growth upwards and help to repay the debt automatically. So that's clearly the hope that we economists globally have, is that obviously last year we had to fill the gap left by the pandemic, so the debt created help as a cushion, so to say. But the debt which will be created now, we need to be all very vigilant that it is invested wisely to generate future growth so that it repay itself. And in the meantime, we have a forward guidance from central bank, which give us some time, which ensure that financing costs should remain low for the foreseeable future. One of the slides, which is very popular in our latest guide to the market, which have been released at the start of the year, is the long-term evolution of debt to GDP in the US, of growth, and the 10 years yield in the US. We went back to Second World War II, and in a very similar environment from a debt to GDP perspective and GDP volatility, the Fed in the 40s managed to engineer very low interest rates. So we need to hope that this will be repeated again, and then we will have good debt.
Vincent, we're going to take a quick break, come back with more from Vincent Juvans, JP Morgan Asset Management Global Market Strategist. Also locked down for longer. Angela Merkel tightens COVID restrictions as Germany reports the highest number of daily deaths since the pandemic began. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to the European market open. It is inauguration day. That's where our attention, where the attention of many market participants will be as we go through today's session. That takes place, of course, in Washington on the steps of the Capitol a little bit later on today. We see the FTSE 100 down around 0.1%. Elsewhere, modest gains being made by European equity markets. US futures point to the upside, in particular on the NASDAQ, where Netflix could make all the difference. Let's get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Some of the other corporate stories we're covering today. In fact, starting with Netflix. Here's Laura Wright.
Thanks, Anna. Well, Netflix has ended its biggest ever year with a bang, adding more subscribers than expected and saying it no longer needs to borrow money in order to expand. It attracted more than 8.5 million new customers in the final quarter, pushing the total over 200 million for the first time. It was helped by new shows like Bridgerton and The Queen's Gambit. Disney's executive chairman, Bob Iger, saw his pay slump more than 50% last year to $21 million. Disney was hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, being forced to close its theme parks and postpone movie releases. Due to those losses, some bonuses were scrapped and executive pay reined in. ASML has beat expectations for this quarter and is planning a significant share buyback. The Dutch firm supplies the machines used to make semiconductors and is a crucial supplier to the likes of Samsung and TSMC. It's mostly insulated from the pandemic-induced downturn as its customers are working to make the latest computers faster, cheaper and more efficient. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Matt, Anna.
Laura, thanks very much. Laura right there in London with your Business Flash. Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has extended and tightened the country's coronavirus restrictions. The rules, which include closing non-essential stores and restricting movement in hard-hit areas, will run until February 14th. That comes after Germany reported its highest daily death toll since the pandemic began. Vincent Yvonce, JP Morgan Asset Management Global Market Strategist, is still here with us. Vincent, what does this mean for the European economy? Not just this lockdown extension, but all of these lockdowns that are causing so many thousands of small and medium-sized businesses to declare bankruptcy. How can even the stimulus injections possibly help an economy like that damaged recover?
No, there will be casualties. I guess everyone is aware of it. Business lobbies across Europe are obviously already raising the alarm that we have delayed the inevitable quite well, I must say. Policymakers did a great job in 2020, deploying not only monetary stimulus, but also fiscal stimulus to really help the treasury position of most corporates and avoid a wave of bankruptcies. But we are seeing some cracks at the moment. The longer the crisis lasts, obviously, the more damage will be left over time. We have seen already a big layoff announced by several prominent European corporates over the last couple of weeks. So we need to roll out this vaccine fast, and we need to get back to normal as fast as possible, because otherwise the damage will be important. This said, while we have struggled in the beginning with this vaccination campaign, I see recently a lot of improvement on the continent. The UK has been quite efficient at this, I must say, but in France we were really lagging in the beginning of the vaccination campaign, but now we are catching up, and I see this in every country. So from a, let's say, scenario or base case perspective, we continue to look at an improvement for the second part of the year. Yeah. I should say also that Germany announced new measure recently, but the lockdown we are experiencing at the moment, it's still lighter than what we had a year ago in March, April.
Yeah, you certainly see that in some of the high-frequency data in various economies, Vincent. Let me ask you about opportunity then for investment in Europe. I know that climate change is a big theme. Electric vehicles could be one way to play that. But do you invest in European car makers to play that card? Because, of course, some of them are struggling against chip shortages. That's the most current story. And legacy, maybe legacy cost bases causing a problem as well, Vincent. Where do you invest around EV?
thanks, Anna, for linking, let's say, the tech theme with the consumer cyclical. But I guess that's definitely something to say about consumer cyclical, consumer discretionary in Europe and globally. And there's a lot of pent-up demand. There's a lot of demand for new type of vehicle. When you see in many countries, one in three vehicle are a hybrid now or electric. There's a huge move which is boosted also by government regulation to push people in this direction. It has been particularly true in France, for instance. So it's not going to be a wave which lifts all boats together. Some car makers are better at hybrid and electric vehicle than other, but it's definitely a theme where I would pay attention as an investor, because we've just discussed the arrival of Joe Biden in the US as 46th president of the United States. Its climate ambition, we should not forget obviously that Europe has already also huge climate ambition. So I would expect those sectors which are exposed to this theme to perform quite well. So indeed, climate change for us is a big theme globally, and Europe is well positioned to lead, let's say, in this environment. Since many years, we invest a lot in this area. We are already coping with much higher carbon price than or international peers. So we have already adjusted and reduced our carbon intensity, generally speaking, so which position as well for the future. So we have increased our exposure to Europe at the end of last year. We continue to keep this position, and we believe that indeed there will be some catch-up in consumer cyclical, among other, in Europe.
All right, Vincent, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate getting your insight this morning. Vincent Youvance, JP Morgan Asset Management Global Market Strategist. He's going to be continuing the conversation with Anna and myself on Bloomberg Radio at 9 a.m. UK time. So if you're in the city of London, tune in on London DAB Digital Radio. Coming up, Netflix surges as much as 13% after hit shows and positive free cash flow encourage investors. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to the European market open. 24 minutes into the European trading session. Modest gains up 0.3% on this inauguration day. Nasdaq futures getting a lift, though, up by 0.6%. A focus on Netflix. And let's go to that story next, because Netflix ended its biggest year in company history with a bang. The streaming giant soared in late trading, up as much as 13% after reporting a surge in new customers. Here with the details is Bloomberg's Danny Berger. They cannot all have been watching Bridgerton, Danny.
Maybe not all, but a lot of people, I myself have to admit I was included in that. But these numbers are really due because of these new shows that came in, people who wanted to sign up and watch them. Now, we did get a lot of new viewers at the start of 2020, and the concern was that they all flocked to the beginning of the year, so we wouldn't get that pickup at the end. Instead, 8.5 million subscribers added, beating expectations, seeing customers surpass 200 million. Now, the other big takeaway is that Netflix doesn't need to rely on its debt to fuel growth. We're starting to see more positive free cash flow, and analysts had said the debt burden was the biggest looming disaster for Netflix after 2019 saw $3.3 billion in cash burn. Well, we've bounced back from that, and in fact, for 2021, Netflix now says it's going to have a positive free cash flow. That's even leading them to start to talk about putting a buyback into place, the first time Netflix will have done so in company history. Anna, Matt?
All right, Danny, thanks very much. Danny Berger there talking to us about Netflix and the positive cash flow that has created some positive buzz around the stock. Indeed, some real buying and pushing the price up 13%. Coming up the end of an era, the London Metals Exchange proposes permanently closing its iconic trading floor. We'll speak with the CEO, Matthew Chamberlain, next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Markets. This is the European Open, 30 minutes into the session, and let's take a look at how stocks are acting and which sectors are on the move. Here you see the Stocks Europe 600 actually gaining 0.33%, while the FTSE falls, albeit only 0.1%. The DAX and the CAC also up about 0.33%. In terms of the sectors on the move, you've got to pull up the group ranked returns screen to see that. And there it is. And you can see the gainers, tech stocks. We talked to ASML a little bit earlier. Basic resources stocks. So interestingly, they're pretty big heavyweights on the FTSE, and they are gaining today, as well as automakers and auto parts makers, plus consumer products and soap. In terms of the losers, utilities are falling this morning. You've also got, well, there's another new one, FB&T, food, beverage, and toast, currently down about 0.25%.
Maybe tobacco.
And then PDC and GS. You know, recently they've rejigged the Stocks 600 groups, and some of these acronyms, PCD and GS, it seems just like far too many letters to expect us to understand exactly what it is. We have to dig into the Bloomberg in order to get that, and it's pretty easy with the GRR screen, to be honest with you.
I can guarantee that the T in FB&T is not toast. I think that's tobacco, but the other one we'll have to look up. Matt, let's get
food,
an
beverage,
update on
and tobacco. And PCD, by the way, is personal care, drug, and grocery stores.
That's a big category.
But
isn't it?
Yeah, but there
a
are
lot of
20
very
groups,
specific stocks in there. Let's get a Bloomberg First Red News update. For that, here's Laura Wright.
Thanks, Anna. Well, it's Inauguration Day in the United States. President Trump will skip the ceremony, but in a rare sign of goodwill, is wishing the next administration good luck. Washington is on high alert after the attack on the Capitol 2 weeks ago. The top Republican in the Senate puts the blame squarely at Trump's door.
The last time the Senate convened, we had just reclaimed the Capitol from violent criminals who tried to stop Congress from doing our duty. The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people.
Germany is extending and tightening its lockdown. Non-essential stores will stay closed until February 14th, but it stopped short of imposing a national curfew like France. Chancellor Angela Merkel is warning it may need to impose border controls to guard against new variants of the virus. Italy's Prime Minister has survived a crucial confidence vote, but fell short of an outright majority. He campaigned to get centrist and independent lawmakers on side, but failed to fully plug the gap left by the defection of Matteo Renzi and his Italy Alive party. He will need an outright majority if he wants to stay in power longer term. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg. Matt, Anna.
Laura, thanks very much. Laura Wright here in London with your First Word News update. Coming up on the programme, we'll bring you live coverage of Joe Biden's swearing in from 4 p.m. London time. Our coverage starts at 11 a.m. New York time, Washington time, 4 p.m. London time. The actual ceremony, of course, an hour later, but do join us for the preamble, for the build-up, as all eyes will no doubt be today on Washington. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Markets. This is the European Open. We are 37 minutes into the session. You can see stocks are gaining across Europe. They are down, well, really little changed in London right now, but the DAX is up 1/3%, a little more. The CAC also a little bit more than 1/3%. In the U.S., Joe Biden arrived in the Capitol yesterday ahead of his inauguration today. It's expected to be a ceremony unlike any other that's come before in American history. And EU leaders have called for a reset on U.S. relations. Joining us now is Peter Beyer, the German Foreign Ministry's transatlantic coordinator. And Peter, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you joining us today. I'm wondering, you know, as Trump was doing the things he did, a lot of people thought, well, those will just be undone with a nested administration. But did he start some balls rolling that just can't be stopped?
Yeah, certainly. There are some topics that will remain in place. You have everything that has to do with trade, the pipeline project, Nord Stream 2, and also definitely defense spending.
Right. Good morning to you, Peter. And you mentioned Nord Stream, and I want to ask you about that because the Democrats have also raised concerns about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Do you expect that that project will continue to strain then transatlantic relations, certainly between Germany and the US?
Yes, I think it will stay in place as a topic, but in the past several years, I think it was completely exaggerated, overloaded from its priorities. So I think, my expectancy is that it will, go where it should be. So belong on the transatlantic negotiating table, but not more. There's so many more, much more important topics, but it will remain in place, and we need to talk about that.
But I can understand, though, and maybe this is the American in me, the concern, right? Because here you have the German government backing a pipeline that's going to effectively ship billions of euros, dollars, or rubles, depending how you want to look at it, to Vladimir Putin as he's doing things like, and maybe using that money to do things like annexing Crimea, or as he uses that money to do things like send buses full of riot police to arrest Alexei Navalny. How can the German government justify funding Vladimir Putin's exploits?
Yeah, well, there's certainly some, communication that could have been improved in the beginning. Mistakes have been made, but look, now reality is that the pipeline has almost been completed. But several remarks on Nord Stream 2. One thing, it's over 12 EU member countries are affected. Over 100 private companies throughout the European Union are affected by these extraterritorial sanctions threat. And one thing, the reason why that had been started to be built at all was in the beginning that we need to look around for diversification when it comes to energy security. The sources in the North Sea, the sources in the Netherlands are drying out. Actually, basically, the Netherlands have stopped exploiting their gas volumes, sources. So we need to look around. Was it the best idea to take Russian gas? I don't know, but it's reality. It's almost there. But in my last speech in the Bundestag on Nord Stream 2, I also made it a point that we will certainly also look to the circumstances, with regard to labor protection, environmental protection, under which circumstances this gas is being, exploited in Russia. It's completely intransparent in Russia, and that is something that we definitely will have a look at. And I also would add that that is one of the reasons where we would, depend our decision, could condition our decision on if there will ever flow any gas through this pipeline.
Interesting to think about that, Peter. Another point of tension, of course, could be relationships between Europe and China. And I wonder how you see Europe having to make decisions around China here, because sure, the US has provided security in the past to Europe, but that's not been something that could be assumed always under President Trump. And China is going to be perhaps the largest economy in the world as soon as 2028. Do you think that Europe will have to choose between the US and China?
No, I don't see us in a situation where we really have to make a decision. US yes or no, or China yes or no. I think with the incoming Biden administration, we will see a lot of folks, including the president and the Secretary of State and many others in the National Security Council, which have much better understanding than the Trump administration of Europe, of the complexities, the mechanisms, and of the interests. I think we will see a lot of common interest when we look towards China. So there's a lot of potential where we could do a joint strategy towards China. But also truth is that it's a huge market. There is a lot of German investments in and trade in and with China that will not go away. But on my personal standpoint, when it comes, for example, to critical infrastructure, 5G, we should not allow the Chinese folks to get involved in our 5G telecommunications grid here in Germany. And also we have jointly with the American friends make clear public statements that we cannot allow human rights violations. We cannot allow IP theft. And when it comes to trade and the reform of the World Trade Organization, consequences have to be faced when there's a violation or an abuse of the system. That is something where we need to do something together, European Union with the American friends.
Donald Trump also pushed for the Germans to finally meet their commitments when it comes to defense spending. That still didn't happen during any of the years of his presidency, but it seems as if Germany realized maybe this country wants to or needs to start to think more about dealing with its own defense. Do you think that will be a priority even under Armin Laschet and the next government?
Yes, it has to be. Look, we have made our self-commitment. We signed in 2014 the Defense Investment Pledge. We have started very sluggishly in the beginning, but 2 or 3 years ago, we tried to increase by over 45% now compared to 2014 our defense budget. So we've started late, but we did a lot. But it's not enough. So a clear commitment from my part and from the German government towards the 2% goal. It is necessary. It's in our own security interest. We made that pledge. And Germany needs and wants to be a reliable ally for the other NATO ally countries. So that is important.
Peter, thanks very much. Peter Bayer, the German Foreign Ministry's transatlantic coordinator. Thank you very much for bringing us your perspective on this US presidential inauguration day. Now, the London Metals Exchange has proposed closing its trading floor permanently, putting an end to the century-old practice of setting the world's metals prices in a daily shouting match. The iconic trading floor, known as the Ring, is one of the last of its kind in the world, where deals take place face-to-face in a chaotic daily ritual of barked commands and arcane hand gestures. They seem to make a lot of sense to those involved, though. Danny Berger is here with a guest on the subject. Danny.
Anna, thanks so much. Yeah, it's certainly iconic images. Thrilled to say that joining us now is Matthew Chamberlain, the London Metals Exchange CEO. Matt, thank you so much for joining again. And, last time we talked, it was the height of the pandemic, late May, June. And back then you had said you wanted to reopen the venue as soon as we didn't have social distancing measures. You were really optimistic about the idea of the Ring reopening. So what changed between then and now that you've decided to close it permanently?
Yeah, thanks, Annie. So I think it's important to emphasize that we are still very happy to reopen the Ring if the pandemic situation is able to be resolved in the next few months. So in no way does putting out a discussion paper yesterday undermine that commitment that as and when it's healthy and safe for our dealers and broader society to get back into the Ring, we're very happy to reopen it. We've got our team keeping the Ring ready to reopen. But at the same time, this period of electronic pricing, which has been forced upon us by the pandemic, means that we've been able to collect 10 months of data on electronic pricing. And we think that that data shows that electronic pricing has been really successful. So we also felt it was the right thing to do to put out a paper and say, here's what we think, and now let's have a conversation with our market about the longer term future of the Ring.
What is that threshold then, Matt, that you say, okay, it's been closed for X number of months, let's go ahead and move permanently to electronic trading?
Well, like I say, so the paper has come out, and we're going to be collecting feedback until the end of March. And I imagine that we and our board will make a decision, a final decision, in April. So, it's possible, if the vaccination programs go well, that we may be able to reopen before April. But I think come April, we'll be in a position to give our view on the long-term future of the ring. And of course, at that point, if we say that we've decided the ring is going to close, then we probably wouldn't then reopen it. So that's the timing that we're looking at.
Matt, what are some of the growing pains you've experienced in the time that it has been all electronic trading? I think we have a chart that shows volumes at the LME have been falling since the floor closed. Is there a concern that if you do go to all electronic trading, that you're going to get some more traditional traders who won't be willing to make that switch to electronic?
Yeah, I think that's a question we've spent a lot of time thinking about. So clearly last year was exceptional, and certainly in the second half, pretty much all global commodity markets saw some risk off, some reduction of volumes. So certainly we don't think that the volume fall is driven purely by the ring. At the margin, maybe there's some effect, but we think it was a broader macro story. But on the flip side, we feel that moving to electronic could bring in a new cast of trading participants who are maybe more willing to trade on an electronic pricing mechanism. So yeah, we absolutely accept that at the margin, possibly there's some trades that we lose by not having the ring, but by being able to give certainty on our future direction, on if we do move to electronic as we've proposed, that we can then bring in some new participants who I think could more than make up that volume.
When we talk about new participants, Matt, I'm curious about diversity as well, because when you think about the ring, you think of loud, boisterous traders and a predominantly male-driven industry. If you do go fully electronic from now into the future, could that help promote diversity of traders as well?
Yeah, it's certainly a key priority for us. I mean, I would mention that I think we've been working very closely with our ring dealers over the past years to enhance inclusivity, enhance diversity. We came out with our code of conduct, which I think was a big step forwards in making everybody feel welcome on the LME floor. So I want to emphasize that our proposal has nothing to do with the sense that the ring is bad or that it can't embrace diversity. I believe that it can. But I do agree with you that perhaps moving to an electronic model does bring in a broader set of traders, be more diverse on gender characteristics, on international characteristics perhaps as well, and that could be a positive additional benefit of what we're proposing.
Matt, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Matthew Chamberlain, London Metals Exchange CEO, thank you so much. Anna, Matt, I don't know if either of you have had the pleasure to visit the ring. Certainly iconic. It's got those bright red couches, telephones everywhere, and it's been around for 144 years.
Yeah, really interesting. I love the pictures. I love the imagery, and you wonder how long it'll last. Thanks very much, Danny Berger. Thanks very much for bringing that conversation, and we'll see whether that last bastion of open outcry manages to survive the pandemic or not. Coming up on the programme, how would the dollar trade under Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary? We'll put that question to Market Live's Christina Aquino. She's with us next. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Markets. This is the European Open. We are 54 minutes into the session right now. Seeing the FTSE turn back higher from the red arrows we saw a little bit earlier, up 0.2%. The Stocks Europe 600, the broader European benchmark, now gaining 0.6%. Joining us to talk markets is Christine Aquino. She leads our Markets Live team here in Europe. And Christine, let's talk first about what people are expecting, from Biden's inauguration. It's an exciting event for sure. It looks like we have a risk on Wednesday. Is this all about the stimulus?
That plays well in all the potential, particularly when it.
I'm going to say that we need to do some infrastructure spending in the UK. Because,
I think we perhaps do. Is this another situation where the phone line is letting us down, Matt?
Yeah, it sounds like, either it's down or she didn't want to answer my question and she's faking it like Chevy Chase in Fletch. Have you seen Fletch when he has to go to a lunch date?
No, but I get a sense of what it sounds like. I'm sure you have, Matt Miller. We're trying to get Christine back.
Yes. We are. I was going to say, as we redial, we could take another look at the markets, and not just the equity picture, but if you look at yields rising, it looks like investors are comfortable enough to let go of U.S. debt. The dollar continues to fall. Right now, the Bloomberg Dollar Index is down at 11.21, and we have some economic gains. Or economic gain expectations pushing up things like oil. And Brent crude, for example, is trading at $56.35 a barrel.
Yeah, it does seem interesting the way we seem to be trading a number of themes, though, today, doesn't it, Matt? I mean, there's the reflation trade, and you were talking there to Christine, you were asking about whether we were going to see reflation trade and fiscal stimulus being the order of the day. Is that what's pushing us higher? And that could be blamed for pushing up oil prices as well. But at the same time, you don't see all of that trade playing out necessarily. We've got the dollar moving to the downside. We've got fixed income looking a bit more mixed right now, and there had been a link between higher bond yields and that fiscal spending in other sessions, on other days when we've been talking about reflation. So a slightly more complex picture. Inauguration day today, Matt Miller.
It is Inauguration Day, and I'm excited to talk more with Vincent Uvens, the global market strategist, JP Morgan Asset Wealth Management. We have him on our radio program, which is coming up in just 3 minutes' time, and viewers can become listeners if they like. Well, you can't really even see us. We're so covered with yields here. But if you want to listen to the radio program, you can tune in the city of London on DAB Digital Radio. You can also, anywhere in the world, just Google Bloomberg Radio and click on Listen Live. If you continue to want to watch TV,
this is still TV, despite all of the graphics.
With Francine Lacroix.
A new dawn in America. Joe Biden becomes the 46th president today. Trump issues a flurry of pardons, but none for himself or his family. Conte battles on. The Italian prime minister works to broaden support after falling short of an outright majority in a crucial Senate vote. And Jack Ma resurfaces for the first time since Beijing began clamping down on his empire. Shares in Alibaba surge. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, quite a lot going on, of course, with the inauguration of Joe Biden after the pardons late last night, almost into the night in Washington, D.C. time. We'll have a look, of course, at the Biden policies, what they mean for the future of the economy. We'll have a look at what it means, of course, for also the Biden administration trying to get a handle on COVID-19 after, I have to say, a pretty touching memorial that we saw yesterday with the vice president and the president-elect, both flanked by their spouses. This is what the market is focusing on. So, of course, the market focusing on the dollar declining. A lot of, I guess, the focus is on earnings, but also hopes for more stimulus. We have a bit of a mixed picture when it comes to earnings. And then the standout is definitely Alibaba jumping after the billionaire Jack Ma resurfaced from months out of public view. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News. Here in London with me is Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Good morning, Francine. More than 400,000 Americans have now died of COVID-19, the world's highest death toll. The U.S. has given more than 35 million vaccines, with President-elect Joe Biden saying he wants to deliver 100 million in his first 100 days. One positive sign, however, the number of hospitalizations in California is now starting to drop. In Europe, Germany is extending and tightening its lockdown. Non-essential stores will stay closed until February the 14th, but it stops short of imposing a national curfew, much like France. Chancellor Angela Merkel is warning it may need to impose border controls to guard against new variants of the virus. And Italy's prime minister has survived a crucial confidence vote, but fell short of an outright majority. He campaigned to get a centrist and independent lawmakers on his side, but failed to fully plug the gap left by the defection of Matteo Renzi and his Italy Alive party. He'll need an outright majority if he wants to stay in power longer term. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Francine.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now, inauguration like no other. Joe Biden will be sworn in as president at the Capitol today. That's about all the day will have in common with most past inaugurations. Now, the parade and, of course, the ride down Pennsylvania Avenue have been replaced by a military lockdown, and the president-elect won't ride to the ceremony with President Trump. Now, the outgoing president will break tradition and not be at his successor's swearing in. Meanwhile, in the final hours of his term, President Trump has also pardoned his former strategist, Steve Bannon. Bannon's been charged with defrauding thousands of investors who believed their money would go to build a wall along the southern border. Instead, Bannon is accused of diverting $1 million of funds, and the president pardoned dozens of others, including rapper Lil Wayne, who pleaded guilty to a federal gun charge. Lil Wayne lost a year. Now, joining us is Lou Lukens. He's senior partner at Signum Global Advisors. Before that, of course, he was a diplomat who served as U.S. ambassador to Senegal and other countries in Africa. He was also the deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in London. In 2008, he was a deputy executive secretary for Hillary Clinton. So, Ambassador Lukens, thank you for joining us on such an important day. How will the American people feel when looking at the inauguration? How many Americans still believe that this was not a legitimate election?
Well, good morning, Francine. Look, unfortunately, a significant number of Americans don't believe that Joe Biden was elected in a legitimate process. And, because Donald Trump continues to sow doubt on the electoral process. So I think while many Americans will be breathing a sigh of relief today and looking forward to a calmer and quieter and a more effective government in the coming months and years, there remains a significant portion of the population that is very angry and upset and does not accept Joe Biden as the legitimate winner. And I think part of Biden's challenge will be trying to bring the country together and heal these divides while still, governing and dealing with these multiple crises that he has on his plate right now.
So how does he deal with the divides, Lou? Is it through a speech today, or is it just through economic growth? And does that have to come through, quicker and better vaccination?
Well, I mean, all of the above, Francine. I mean, first of all, his speech today, I can guarantee you, will be a heartfelt call to unity and for the country to come together to address the health crisis and the economic crisis. A lot of whether that is successful or not, or he is successful or not, will depend, I think, on Republican leadership. And do the Republicans in the Senate work with Joe Biden's administration to help him pass some of his legislative goals, or do they obstruct and block his proposals and his agenda the way they did when President Obama was president? So that will be key, I think, in sort of whether the country is able to move forward and address these crises effectively or not. The other factor will be, what does Donald Trump do next? And if Donald Trump continues to, go on air and hold rallies and raise money and talk about fraud, that will continue to keep his core base angry and divided.
Lou, is he still in charge of the Republican Party after what we heard from Mitch McConnell yesterday? So is Trump's base the Republican Party, or a faction of the Republican Party, or something else?
Well, it's a faction of the Republican Party, but an important and a large faction of it. And there was an interesting poll last week. I think it was NBC had a poll that said, they asked Republicans, should Donald Trump remain the leader, be considered still the leader of the party? And they were evenly split. 48% said yes and 48% said no. So that tells me that, half of the Republican Party still considers Donald Trump their leader. And he also got very high. He got 87% approval rating from Republicans. And this is after the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th. So look, a significant part of that party, Donald Trump is their leader.
Lou, have we ever seen a inauguration that looks anything like today? This is, of course, partly due to the military operation around the president-elect because of the riots on January 6th, but it's also due to COVID.
Right. So, both those factors, the heightened security because of the attacks and also COVID, make this a very different and unique and hopefully one-off type of inauguration. The other thing that's different about it, and you touched on this in your intro, is Donald Trump sort of breaking protocol, that not having the president-elect and the outgoing president drive together to the inauguration, not having the outgoing president there, not having him do that sort of the traditional walking out of the Capitol and getting in a helicopter and taking off with the new incoming president and his spouse, waving at them. So it's a real break in tradition. I suspect a lot of people who will be in Washington today up on the Capitol are just as happy that Donald Trump is not there. But it sends a message, I think, from Donald Trump that he will continue to fight for this election and continue to try to speak out for his base.
Lou, there's quite a long history of maybe controversial pardons, but your take on the Trump pardons?
Well, I honestly haven't had time to go through all 100 of them yet. The thing that really struck me about the way that the process worked this year is normally, pardon requests come through the Department of Justice and they're vetted, and there's some criteria to make sure that people either they've rehabilitated themselves, or they feel badly about what they did, or there's some level of regret for the crimes that they committed. In this case, what happened, they didn't go through the Department of Justice. Most people used lobbyists and friends of the president and family to get to him directly, and he basically made the decisions based on what his inner circle was telling him. So I suspect that there are people on that list of pardons who deserved and the pardons were warranted, but there are probably others who did not meet the traditional criteria for last-minute pardons.
Lou Lukens, what are the three top priorities that the Biden administration should focus on in the first 100 days in office?
Well, sort of the three big buckets, I think, are the health crisis, and he's going to try to do that, 100 million vaccines in the first 100 days. There's a lot of money in his $1.9 trillion spending proposal to get money out to communities to help fight to better testing and better vaccination procedures. The economic crisis is another thing that he will be focused on, and trying to create jobs and build back America from this crisis. And then the third area, I think, will be trying to reestablish America's relationships with allies and partners around the world, and starting to rebuild some of those important partnerships that have been, in rough shape over the last 4 years under President Trump.
Lou, final question maybe on just, the process of the election. How does the U.S. make sure that no one questions, or very few people question the election next time around? Does it need to change balloting? Is it something, very American?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, the balloting in this election was secure, and every state did audits, and there was very little evidence of fraud. So the issue this year wasn't so much the security of the election, because the election was secure and the processes were secure. It was more the reluctance or the inability of a lot of the Republican leadership to accept the results. And I think that's not a technical fix, that's more of a philosophical fix. And does the Republican Party want to become the party that cries wolf and claims fraud every time a Democrat wins? Or will they become more of a sort of traditional party and be willing to accept the results if they lose?
All right, Lou, thank you so much. Lou Lukens, their senior partner at Signum Global Advisors, of course, a former ambassador to the United States of America. In the meantime, Netflix pre-market jumping 12% as subscriber growth beat expectations. And we'll have plenty more, of course, on Netflix. They had some pretty incredible subscription figures blowing past 200 million. Now, coming up, more on the markets and a pretty historic day in America. This is Bloomberg.
It is critically important that the markets stay open in this time, as opposed to trying to take breaks in the middle. I think that that'll just push off the situation a little bit, but actually could create other pent-up issues if you do close the markets.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, while the world's attention is on D.C. today, the market's focus was, of course, on D.C. yesterday because Biden's nominee for Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen appeared before the Senate Finance Committee, where she covered an array of topics. None with more urgency, of course, than the Biden relief plan.
Over the next few months, we're going to need more aid. With interest rates at historic lows, the smartest thing we can do is act big. In the long run, I believe the benefits will far outweigh the costs. The United States does not seek a weaker currency to gain competitive advantage. China is undercutting American companies. These practices, including China's low labor and environmental standards, are practices that we're prepared to use the full array of tools to address. We have to rebuild our economy so that it creates more prosperity for more people and ensures that American workers can compete in an increasingly competitive global economy.
Now, joining us to talk, of course, about the inauguration, about Biden's priorities, and what the Treasury Secretary will do, Davide Serra, Chief Executive of Algebris. Davide, as always, thank you so much for joining us. I have a lot of questions on Italy, I have a lot of questions on banks, but if we start by the markets overall, what are they mispricing? Is there a danger that actually the economy goes one way, the markets go the other, and there's going to be a huge correction because equities are running hot?
Well, Francine, certainly, the key driver here are zero interest rates globally, and basically we're looking at the quantitative easing that on a month-by-month basis is now running between 0.5 and 1% of GDP for the G4 central banks around the world. So when you have basically a death of yield globally, if you look at the $53 trillion fixed income market globally, 90% yields less than 3%. So basically, pension plan, insurance, retirees, whoever needs to pay bills using their assets, it's forced into the equity market. And that's why we're now at more than 20 times earnings, peak multiple. It's basically, there's no other choice. Now, clearly, all this, I think, is going to end the day you see the resurgence of inflation and a bit of steepening the yield curves. And I think this is going to happen over the next 12 to 24 months, simply because, look at the U.S. Treasury issuance. We're now talking about 100 billion per month, vis-a-vis 10 last year. And so eventually, I think the market will do its job and will resettle.
But so, Davide, how are you expecting actually interest rates to be normalized? Are you actually, is this a reflation that you're expecting this year, or is it, above target or maybe above average, let's say, inflation because of the stimulus package in the U.S.?
I think it's a combination. I think on one side, COVID has created bottlenecks in the real supply chain, and as a result has increased cost. And as a result, I think what's going to happen is the massive issuance of government bonds around the world is eventually going to force yield slightly higher. Simply because right now, if you look at inflation expectation minus bond yields, you're in negative territory pretty much around the world. And that's not going to be sustainable.
What does slightly higher yields actually mean for banks that you know so well?
I think it's very positive because in a way, the sector, if you look at the pandemic, the sector that has been an anchor of financial stability and has allowed the Treasury and central banks around the world to deploy their tools this time has actually been the financial sector. And this is thanks to central banks and regulators that over the last 10 years cleaned up the sector. So they made the bank stronger, simpler, clearer, more accountability. And I think this is kudos basically to the Financial Stability Board and the action that has been taken by the Fed and the Federal Central Bank in having fewer banks, stronger banks, cleaner banks. And I think, this anomaly of having zero rates, if not even negative around the world, and all this quantitative easing, who paid the bill has actually been the financial sector, because basically the margins have been crushed. And I think a normal steepening and, rates that eventually are going to move back to zero, if not slightly positive, is how life is supposed to be, simply because, time has value. And when you have negative rates, you basically destroy the concept of time value. That means, having money today is actually a negative. You better, not use it and postpone consumption or investments in the future. That's not how life is, because, as you know, time goes by and every day you miss an opportunity. In reality, there is a cost to it. So what negative rates has, in a way, transformed the way we've been running economic activity, that's not going to be sustainable forever. We've seen it in Japan. And so I think a normalization in the next 2-3 years.
Davide, when you look at the strength of the financial system so far, was the pandemic the ultimate stress, or because we had so much fiscal support, there's going to be another stress? And how do you strengthen that system from here?
Well, this is a good question. You see, right now, around the world, basically, the world is on a public debt to GDP, which is higher than 100%. So that means two things. One, productivity longer term is probably going to be slightly lower. Secondly, rates can never really go that high. Now, that does not mean they should be negative, but you can forget the interest rates on the U.S. Treasury of 3 to 4%, simply because no one will be able to pay that bill. And so there's two ways to default. You basically default in your principal, or you stop paying interest. And when you have zero interest, it's pretty much a default. You have an assets that yield zero. And I think we're in a situation where basically we'll try to rebalance in an equilibrium where there is slightly positive, but not that high. Now, having said so, what I think is going to happen, the reason why this is positive anyway, because basically this period of aggressive financial repression on financials, I think it's come to an end, because their capital buffer, can withstand 1 in 100-year scenario. We've seen it in COVID. Secondly, they are profitable, and third, their margins are likely to go slightly higher rather than lower, simply because I think the market has understood we have touched the lower bound of rates.
Davide, thank you so much. We'll be right back there with Davide Serra of Algebris. Now, coming up, the Biden era begins. What to expect from an inauguration like no other. We'll, of course, bring you live coverage of Joe Biden's swearing in. That's from 4 p.m. London time. And this is Bloomberg. Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Francine. Netflix has ended its biggest ever year with a bang, adding more subscribers than expected and saying it no longer needs to borrow money to expand. It attracted more than 8.5 million new customers in the final quarter, pushing the total over 200 million for the very first time. It was helped by new shows like Bridgerton and The Queen's Gambit. Now, Disney's executive chairman Bob Iger saw his pay slump more than 50% last year to just $21 million. Disney was hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, being forced to close its theme parks and postpone movie releases. Due to those losses, some bonuses were scrapped and executive pay was reined in. And ASML has beat expectations for the quarter and is planning a significant share buyback. The Dutch firm supplies the machines used to make semiconductors and is a critical supplier to the likes of Samsung and TSMC. It is mostly protected from the pandemic downturn as it is working to make the latest computers faster, cheaper and more efficient. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Francine.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now, coming up, Italy's premier battles on. Conte lives to see another day in power after surviving a key vote in the Senate. We look at the details, and of course, he has a minority government almost, so it's very difficult for him to do reforms. We'll look at the pitfalls for that. European stocks for the moment higher on Wednesday, buoyed by earnings and hope for more stimulus. This is Bloomberg.
Another day of risk off across the financial markets. We bring you special coverage of all the price action and implications here on Bloomberg Television.
I was actually poor.
No foreplay?
Eat your bag of Lay's with a smile on your face.
If all the diseases have been taken, I'll take a tax.
It's deeply personal that our next journey to Washington starts here, a place that defines the very best of who we are as Americans. I know these are dark times, but there's always light.
Well, that was Joe Biden speaking yesterday as he departed his home state of Delaware for the nation's capital. He'll become president at noon Washington time today. Now, I was just looking at the markets, actually, which is why I was looking down to see if there's any impact from the stimulus. A lot of talk, of course, was on Janet Yellen and her hearing and testimony yesterday, but the focus now is not only on stimulus, but exactly what Joe Biden will do in his first day in office and then the next 100 days. Now, let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News. Here's Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Francine. As you mentioned, it's Inauguration Day in the United States. President Trump will skip the ceremony, but in a rare sign of goodwill is wishing the next administration luck. Washington is on high alert after the attack on the Capitol 2 weeks ago. The top Republican in the Senate puts the blame squarely at Trump's door.
The last time the Senate convened, we had just reclaimed the Capitol from violent criminals who tried to stop Congress from doing our duty. The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people.
Now, President Trump has pardoned 73 people, including his former strategist Steve Bannon. Bannon was being prosecuted for allegedly defrauding donors over building a wall on the border with Mexico. Another pardon was for rapper Lil Wayne, who pleaded guilty to a federal gun charge. Trump didn't pardon himself or any members of his family. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Francine.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now, the Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has survived a crucial confidence vote in the Italian Senate, but failed to obtain an outright majority. He campaigned to get centrist and independent lawmakers on side, but failed to fully plug the gap left by the defection of Matteo Renzi and his Italy Alive party. Now, he'll need an outright majority if he wants to stay in power longer term. Well, still with us, Davide Serra from Algebris, who, of course, was a long-standing advisor to Mr. Renzi and knows Italian politics, probably like very few people in the market. So, Davide, what happens to how much, Giuseppe Conte, the Prime Minister, can actually get done? How crucial is it that he gains more support to try and do the reforms needed to access fully the recovery fund money?
Francine, I think the crisis was basically live last year in 2020. So out of the G20 country, Italy has the worst GDP in 2020, but most importantly, the worst death rate per habitant. So clearly you have on both axes, the economy and the COVID crisis, a subpar response. But basically, in my view, requires a change in pace and do something better on both fronts. And the status quo is not attainable. And I think as a result, this is the key debate for a couple of months. I think both the PD and Italia Viva have asked a change in pace. And this has led eventually to Italia Viva basically, going the opposition, says we're not happy with what's happening, we need to change pace. And I think right now the government, as a minority government, is facing 1 in a 100-year challenge. And so as a result, it won't last, as simple as this. Now, the opposition has already called for the need of having government of national unity. Typically what it means is you bring a very competent person, and in Italy there's quite a few, I can think of Mario Draghi, or similar, and eventually, to properly spend the 200 billion euro that, the European Union has kindly granted between grants and loans so that Italy can do the reform, but you need someone that has already done it before. You can't just pick up a lawyer that 3 years ago no one knew and says, hey, invest 200 billion euro. I mean, it just makes no sense.
So, David, do you think that then in the next 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, there will be a new government with a new Prime Minister in Italy?
I think so. And most importantly, there will be no elections. And the reason why there will be no election is because there's been a change in the electoral law where 20% of people in parliament will eventually, lose their jobs. And what's going to happen is, as a result, in the next election, the majority of the people right now in the upper and the lower house will not be there. And hence, they'll do anything they can, to give a job till 2023, which is good. No election. But at the same time, you need, actions to be taken. That's why I think eventually this will lead to a government of national unity.
David, I want to ask you about European banks shortly, but there's also, of course, UniCredit looking for a new chief executive. Who's the right person for that job?
Listen, I think UniCredit, it's in one of those banks in Europe that it's quite unique. It has 50% of its balance sheet in Germany and Austria and 50% in Italy. And on a profit basis, Italy probably accounts for 2/3. So basically, I think it's someone that, one, can handle these three countries. Secondly, needs to be both Italian and international at the same time. And third, 80% of the shareholder base of UniCredit is actually global funds, institutional investor. So it needs to be someone that has a full support of, the creme de la creme of the institutional shareholder base. And lastly, cannot, in my view, afford to fail for the simple reason that UniCredit on a price to book, it's one of the cheapest company in Europe, and hence whoever comes in needs to turn it around quickly. There is lots of upside that needs to be managed properly and without making mistakes.
Are you a shareholder, Davide? And, or will you be a shareholder depending on who becomes chief executive? Do you have what are you holding right now in terms of Italian and European banking?
Yeah, so in UniCredit, we do have a lot invested in the capital security structure between 81 Tier 2 Senior Emerald. It's one of our largest positions. And we also do have equity because we do believe that the appointment of the next CEO will continue, in my view, in a recovery path that the company has now been on since Mustier came on, clean up the balance sheet. Secondly, I think within Europe, we think there is lots of upside in the banking sector. Simply put it, the sector has a cash of about 150 euro a share. The SX7E, which is the index that most investors look at, and it's currently trading at 75. So basically, it's one of the few sectors in the world that trades at 50 cents in a dollar. And with rising rates and the possibility in the markets and the possibility at the same time of further consolidation, I do expect the sector to keep on its re-rating over the next 2 to 3 years. Yeah. So I think it's a structural reflation, and so we're positive.
Cross-border consolidation, Davide? Or does it have to be domestic consolidation first, which we've already seen the first signs of in Italy?
I think domestic will keep on happening. We've seen it in Spain. You have seen it in Italy. I think it will keep on happening. And then the only cross-border that I can see right now, it's along business lines. So I think you'll have more across asset management. You might have it seen across, for example, payments. I don't think you will see it in, regulated deposit-taking retail banking activity because there are just no synergies. And as a result, it makes no sense.
All right, Davide, thank you so much. Davide Serra, the Chief Executive of Algebris, and I know we'll have Davide on very soon again to talk more about the banking system. Now, coming up, Jack Ma re-emerges. China's most famous billionaire appears in public for the first time in almost 3 months. We'll bring you the story next. This is Bloomberg.
countrymen. I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, Lyndon Baines Johnson, do solemnly swear.
Let us encourage individuals at home and nations abroad to do more for themselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution.
The President is neither prince nor pope, and I don't seek a window on men's souls. In fact, I yearn for a greater tolerance.
My fellow citizens, today we celebrate the mystery of American renewal.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
That I will execute
faithfully the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States faithfully. So help me God.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear. That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
Well, that was a look back at previous presidential inaugurations, starting with Franklin Roosevelt's second term in 1937. Today, of course, Joe Biden becomes the 46th president of the United States. Now let's get straight to your Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Francine. Netflix has ended its biggest ever year with a bang, adding more subscribers than expected and saying it no longer needs to borrow money to expand. It attracted more than 8.5 million new customers in the final quarter, pushing the total over 200 million for the first time. It was helped by new shows like Bridgerton and The Queen's Gambit. Disney's executive chairman Bob Iger saw his pay slump more than 50% last year to just $21 million. Disney was hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, being forced to close its theme parks and postpone movie releases. Due to those losses, some bonuses were scrapped and executive pay was also reined in. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Francine.
Thanks so much, Leanne. Now, China's most famous billionaire has reemerged from the first time in almost 3 months. Jack Ma spoke briefly during an annual event he hosts to recognize rural teachers. Now, in one video of the event, the Alibaba founder can be seen touring a primary school in his hometown of Hangzhou. It's the first time he's been seen in public since Beijing's tech crackdown last year. Well, let's get more now on this with our reporter Lulu Chen. Lulu, great to have you. I know one of the first things that people, were reading about today, and it's the most read story on the Bloomberg terminal, I think, after inauguration, is of course what happened to Jack Ma so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Investors are taking this as a good signal. You can see from the share price reaction, some people think that this is a message that the billionaire is sending out without being too innocuous, that he's out of the doghouse. That said, it is unclear whether Ma made that appearance with the government blessing and also what it means for his companies going forward.
So what do you think it means going forward, Lulu? We had a bump up in Alibaba shares. So do investors, what are they making of this thing?
I think what we should interpret this as is that there is no personal execution against Jack Ma, but the inspection on Alibaba and Ant is still ongoing. The PBOC has still told Ant that it needs to overhaul its business. The antitrust investigations against Alibaba are still ongoing. Just now, the central bank sent out a new regulation saying that they are going to step up curbs against any payments company, and if they have more than 50% of market share, they could be subject to antitrust probes. So there is still this overall tone of stepping up regulation against fintech giants.
So, Lulu, how would shareholders actually, once they really understand the implications of this, how quickly could it be rolled out, and what does it actually mean for shareholders?
I think right now the the shareholders initially had a too strong reaction and probably were bracing for the worst. So this is a step up against that. But the timeline for solving the issues and are going to take a lot longer. That's what our sources have told us. The likelihood of reviving an IPO in 2021 are still very slim.
All right, Lulu, thanks so much. Lulu Chen there, of course, our reporter on the ground, joining us with the very latest on technology stocks in Asia and China in particular. Now, coming up, Netflix surges as much as 13% after its shows, drawing more subscribers. We'll have all of the details next, and this is Bloomberg.
Climate change is the defining issue of our time, so we've redefined how we cover it. With clear data and rigorous journalism, we rise to the scale of the challenge to reveal the breadth of possibility. We look at stories from every angle to provoke debate, spotlight solutions, and make sense of the greatest crisis of our generation. Bloomberg Green, solutions for a changing climate.
It is critically important that the markets stay open in this time as opposed to trying to take breaks in the middle. I think that that'll just push off the situation a little bit, but actually could create other pent-up issues if you do close the markets.
The last time the Senate convened, we had just reclaimed the capital from violent criminals who tried to stop Congress from doing our duty. The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people.
Well, that was Mitch McConnell speaking yesterday ahead of Biden's inauguration at noon D.C. time today. Now, we'll bring you, of course, full live coverage right here on Bloomberg throughout the day during an inauguration like no other. Now, Burberry shares gaining this morning despite a drop in sales as stores remain closed across much of the world. Let's get that story and some of the other stock movers with our Danny Berger. Hi, Danny.
Hi, Francine. That's right. A lot of luxury goods reporting today. Burberry is an interesting one because, like you say, they disappointed. Their sales in the quarter fell 9%. The estimate was for a drop of 8%, but still, Burberry at 4.5%, a little bit more than that. They're the third biggest gainer on the stock 600. Now, according to Morgan Stanley, they say that part of this has to do with the fact that their full price sales are doing better. In other words, they're not discounting as much, and that in turn will elevate the status of Burberry. Still, the thing that Burberry has to deal with right now is their stores being closed, less tourism, less people coming from overseas to Europe to buy some of their goods. So that's the stress on the other side. Now, Richemont actually beat earnings estimates. Their sales were propelled heavily by China, Chinese sales rising 80%. That means for the entirety of all the regions, they had more than 4 billion euros worth of sales. That beat the estimate. We had some positive analyst reactions to the City, for one, saying, you know, their jewelry segment, that's doing really well. But we've seen the share price fade throughout the day. Trading has been really active. We've seen 4 times the normal volume that we have over the past 20 days. And part of that disappointment might be that their online sales didn't do as well as some had expected, especially because Richemont has really plowed billions of dollars into getting up their digital sales. Finally, ASML, the chip maker, now trading at a record high, up 2.7%. The chip boom continues for this company. They beat analysts' expectations. ING calling the results very impressive, thinking that the momentum is going to continue into the first quarter. ASML also talking about doing a pretty sizable share buyback in the first quarter as well. Francine?
Thank you so much. Our Danny Berger there with some of the main stock movers after we had quite a lot of earnings. Now let's get more on another big stock that's moving. Netflix ending the biggest year in its history with a bang, adding more customers than expected and saying it no longer needs to borrow money to build its entertainment empire. Its shares surging more or as much as 13% in pre-market trade. Now let's get some more on this story with our Bloomberg opinion columnist, Alex Webb, who focuses, of course, on technology stories. Alex, which number do investors need to actually focus on when looking at Netflix?
It's free cash flow. As you alluded to there, they have borrowed a lot of money in the past in order to invest in content and ensure they have a rich library of content. Of course, that meant they had significant negative free cash flow, peaking at about $3 billion in 2019. Last year, very different story, $1.9 billion of positive free cash flow. That, of course, means, as you suggest, that they don't need to borrow money in significant quantities anytime soon. And it also plots a trajectory for some of the other companies looking to get into the streaming space.
So, Alex, what's the real significance of these earnings? Does it bode well for others, or is Netflix also just creating great content, which is, means that they'll have more subscribers than other providers?
It certainly indicates that, that this is a path worth taking. There's a lot of pressure on the likes of CBS, Viacom, Disney, other companies who are building their own streaming platforms are warning investors they're going to have to take a bit of a hit up front on profitability as they invest in it. Netflix is demonstrating that it could be worthwhile in the long run. Now, the question is, how many streaming platforms are consumers going to be willing to pay for every month? Indications are maybe 3 or 4. Then the question becomes, what are those 3 or 4 platforms going to be? Is there space for everyone? Netflix clearly has first mover advantage here, and perhaps some others, not least Disney, are hopeful that they've got up enough of a head of steam to be one of the other ones that people are paying for by default.
First mover advantage for Netflix, you mentioned Disney Plus. How's Amazon doing? Are there 3 that, is it too soon to know actually who will make it and who won't?
I think Amazon is a significantly different proposition, because Amazon actually isn't necessarily trying to make money from streaming. It's a sort of way of getting people into Amazon Prime, and then it makes money on the back end by getting people to order products for rapid delivery there. I get the sense that actually the content library in Amazon Prime is maybe losing a little bit of luster compared to the significant investments being done by others. But it has, of course, the deeper pockets of Amazon behind it. I think a bigger question perhaps is the extent to which Apple can start to keep up. If you think about the fact that Netflix borrowed something like $15 billion to invest in content over 3 years, Apple has very deep pockets. At the moment, it's spending a lot less than that. But could decide to flip a switch and really accelerate it, given that it's seeing now that Netflix is able to become cash flow positive. And that has been the question mark, that does this business model have a sustainability to it? Does it have a way of becoming profitable? Perhaps Apple now will think about flipping a switch and doing the same.
Alex, thanks so much. Alex Webb there from Bloomberg Opinion on Netflix and others. Now, coming up, the Biden era begins. What to expect from an inauguration like no other. We'll bring you live coverage throughout the day. This is Bloomberg.
Another day of risk off across the financial markets. We bring you special coverage of all the price action and implications here on Bloomberg Television. A new dawn in America. Joe Biden becomes the 46th president of the United States today. The celebrations have been replaced by a military lockdown. In his final hours, President Trump pardons dozens, but none for himself or his family. His departure ceremony takes place at Joint Base Andrews hours before the inauguration. And Jack Ma resurfaces for the first time since Beijing began clamping down on his empire, shares in Alibaba's surge. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Tom and Francine from London and New York. Tom, huge day, of course, in Washington. We'll have full team coverage. Also, a very different feel, partly because of COVID, partly because of the insurgents on January 6th. That means that many more security measures have been put in place. And then I think we have some breaking news out of the Biden administration. Tom, they're just breaking on the Bloomberg terminal. We understand that he will sign 15 executive actions today, right after the inauguration, to try and undo some of the actions in the past that President Trump had been taking. Now, the executive orders include plans to rejoin the Paris Climate Pact, undo Trump's immigration ban, and stop construction of the border wall. So we'll have plenty more on that
Tom, are you seeing anything else?
Well, I think it's what it is. It's just a shifting here of 15 orders out of the many, many more that will be addressed in the coming days. But it really signals, Francine, the choreography of this day, obviously an original choreography going back to really the sense of the modern inauguration, which I'm going to put with Teddy Roosevelt. And of course, you can go back to Lincoln's iconic first speech and then truly back to the founding fathers. But what's interesting, Francine, is the ballet of the day begins here in New York and Washington at 5 a.m. with significant statements by the new administration.
Yeah, the new president, breaking just moments ago, will sign at least 15 day one executive actions. Now, for more on this, let's get straight to our Marty Schenker, who's Bloomberg editor-at-large. Marty, 15 executive orders on day one. Does this give us the tone and the speed at which, President-elect, soon-to-be President Biden wants to go?
Yeah, I think it does, Francine, and it's very interesting. The difference between this administration and the previous administration. There was a full briefing for reporters in advance. It was all held under embargo. Questions were answered. This is quite different from governing by Twitter.
Okay, what's most significant? So when you have these 15 executive orders, and we understand through aides of Joe Biden that this is more day one executive actions than any of his predecessors, what will actually change for the American economy? What's the most significant thing that the president will do today?
Well, a lot of those things that are truly significant are not going to be, he's not going to be able to do by executive order. A lot of these things are symbolic gestures. For instance, the immigration reform is extremely controversial. He is putting it as legislation before Congress, but there's going to be a pitched battle over that one. And there are other, the actions on the wall and the actions on Paris Climate Accord probably don't have an immediate impact on the economy.
Marty, it is a day of symbolism, and obviously this is a key word for this new administration, unity as well. Dick Durbin of Illinois is looking for some form of conversation with Republicans. What is the Schenker calculus of how we get to unity on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think one of the first things they have to do in terms of showing unity is figuring out how to actually undertake the impeachment trial of President Trump, who, as we all know, is leaving office at noon today. And if they can work out that understanding in the Senate, along with how the power sharing will go in the Senate between McConnell and Schumer, then you might actually see some joint legislation happen in Congress in what we all think of as a Biden honeymoon.
Marty, totally unfair to bring up with you, but you've got such years of perspective, and I think The Hill really talked this up as well. I saw some chat on MSNBC as well. Do you just presume that there were quote-unquote secret pardons that are granted but not visible until necessary?
I actually don't have any idea whether that's true. What is interesting to me is the now competing narratives and what is going to dominate the news cycle. Is it going to be Trump's pardons?
Yeah.
Or does Joe Biden's inauguration and his executive actions overtake Donald Trump's final actions in office?
Marty, what will you look for today in the speech? It is a speech, a messaging and all, and I believe unity is front and center, but we listen carefully. What will you listen for?
I'm going to listen for exactly where he thinks he can reach compromise with the Republicans on getting things actually done in Congress. I mean, I'm sure he's going to be quite eloquent about the issues of bringing the country together. But as a practical matter, where can he make policy with the Republicans to move the country forward?
Marty, there's a number of speculation from U.S. media that, Donald Trump will form a new party. How do the Republicans, deal with that? And how much support would they lose for the Republicans? Is there anyone in the Republican Party that could actually counter that movement or that party?
It's interesting. The idea of a third party has never done well in U.S. politics. Ross Perot couldn't pull it off. there's no history in the U.S. of a third party being successful. But I do think it is true that the leader of the traditional wing of the GOP 2 years down the road or 4 years down the road is not clear at all. And who can marshal those forces is going to be something we're going to watch carefully over the next 2 years.
Marty, what will you specifically look at during the inauguration? So, of course, it's a speech. A reminder, everybody or most people know it's at 12 p.m. that the president actually gets sworn in, 12 p.m. New York or Washington time. Is there anything in terms of pageantry that will capture your imagination?
Well, I mean, I think that the iconic departure from the White House of Donald Trump this morning, will conjure images of Nixon departing the White House. It's going to be quite unprecedented.
Yeah.
He's not going to, and I think that those images are probably going to be among the most dramatic.
I agree, Marty, with that. And of course, folks, this harkens back to the resignation, I believe, in '74 of Richard Nixon. A lot of people commenting here on the compare and contrast to Richard Nixon. Marty, we're going to see something, I believe, at Andrews Air Force Base. We're going to see some form of display by President Trump. Who will be there and who will not? I mean, Vice President Pence isn't going to be there. It's that simple, right?
That's right. He can't be in both places. And plus, we reported at Bloomberg yesterday that they were having a hard time rounding up people who were willing to go to that event at Andrews Air Force Base. So I expect a very tight video shot, but, the networks will pan out and see just how big the crowd is in Donald Trump's final video message to the rest of the country.
Marty, as always, thank you so much. Bloomberg's editor-at-large there, Marty Schenker. Now, stay with Bloomberg, of course, for our coverage of the inauguration. Our lineup of guests include Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont and the former New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly. That starts at 12 p.m. in New York, 5 p.m. in London, with, of course, a special focus on what it means for the U.S. economy. Now, let's get straight to the Bloomberg. First Word News here in London is Emma Chandra. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Tom, Francine. Last-minute pardons and commutations from the White House. Last night, President Trump pardoned his former strategist, Steve Bannon. Bannon's accused of defrauding investors who donated money to help build a wall along the border with Mexico. The president also pardoned rapper Lil Wayne and former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. Joe Biden is sworn in today as president in an inauguration unlike any other. The usual backdrop of celebrations has been replaced by a military lockdown. About 25,000 National Guard troops will be providing security in the wake of the riot at the Capitol. It's a sobering milestone. The U.S. has now gone over 400,000 deaths as a result of the coronavirus. There's also been 24 million infections. That makes the U.S. the global leader in both categories. Incoming President Joe Biden has vowed to speed up the vaccination process. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo needs a nice chunk of that stimulus proposal that President-elect Biden is pushing. Cuomo warned of tax hikes on the wealthy and cuts to schools if he can't get $15 billion in aid. He says he'll sue the federal government if New York doesn't get what he calls its fair share. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Emma Chandra. This is Bloomberg. Francine, Tom.
Emma, thanks so much. Green on the screen here. Futures up 13. Dow futures up equivalent 59. NASDAQ does better. 13,085 on the NASDAQ level. The VIX 22.15 as well. Other than that, pretty much a churn to the market. I would notice sterling buttressed up against a 137. 136.96. And of course, we're watching two stock stories right now. Mr. Ma makes an appearance that lifts Alibaba and Netflix. Okay, I watched Queen's Gambit. That put him over the top. Francine?
I've been watching a lot more Netflix, actually. They have some great French movies on, Tom. I'll tell you about
heard,
it. Or
yeah.
Also, or people that will just message me. Yeah, Lupin, for example. Now, European stocks are tracking U.S. equity futures, Tom. We did have some pretty encouraging earnings news. I'm looking at the luxury sector. Look, Burberry didn't do so great, but if you look at Richemont, they're really having some pretty good results in China. Now, coming up in the next hour, we'll not only go through the markets again, but we'll speak a lot more about the inauguration and some of what President Biden, soon-to-be President Biden, will do on his first day in office. Jason Furman, Harvard professor and former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors during the
the Obama administration joins us. That's at 6:30 a.m. in New York, 11:30 a.m. in London, and this is Bloomberg.
This week, we inaugurate a new administration and pray for its success in keeping America safe and prosperous. We extend our best wishes, and we also want them to have luck.
It's deeply personal that our next journey to Washington starts here, a place that defines the very best of who we are as Americans. I know these are dark times, but there's always light.
The two presidents, and they will not cross paths today. It is the capital of the United States of America, and it is good to see it in dark, because with the daylight, it is a very different view than any other inauguration this nation has faced before, even back to times of the Civil War. I believe the calendar this morning is a 12 noon swearing in, according to my inauguration expert, Francine Lacroix, and also our special coverage beginning at 11 a.m. I know Alex Steele and Guy Johnson have some special conversations at 10 a.m. as well. She will go to the Freedom Plaza, which is a hunk of concrete in northwestern Washington with a great heritage of civil rights, with a great heritage of the domestic politics of Washington. Emily Wilkins now briefs us this morning. Emily, what will you watch for this morning? Within the choreography, within the pomp and changed circumstance, what will you watch for?
Most are going to be keeping an eye on security measures, both in downtown D.C. and around the Capitol area. And then from there, I think it'll be mostly just waiting and watching for Biden for exactly what his speech is, how it's delivered, if we get any final messages from Trump in his last few hours as president.
Well, we first see the president of the United States migrate out on his way to Florida as well. How is the president's trip to Andrews Air Force Base and then on to Florida being taken by both Republicans and Democrats?
Well, when Biden initially heard that Trump would not be attending his inaugural ceremony, he said that it was one of the few things that he and Trump agreed upon. I think there is a sense that Trump is a pretty divisive figure at this point. Particularly, a number of Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, have laid blame at his seat for the riots that we saw at the Capitol. So I don't think there's a lot of love lost as Trump heads to Mar-a-Lago today.
Emily, the new president, Joe Biden, will sign at least 15 day one executive actions. Do they just come into effect straight away, or is there a process that could actually take much longer?
Well, the great thing about executive actions is that they do allow the president to move fairly quickly. I mean, yes, there will be some things from the Biden administration wants as far as larger immigration reform, tax reform that will take longer. But a couple of these things Biden can do pretty quickly as far as rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, rejoining the World Health Organization, revoking the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, imposing a mask mandate, all things that he does plan to sign, executive actions he plans to sign on his first day.
Emily, is there anything in these executive orders that makes you think that he's not reaching, across the aisle as he could?
I mean, these are all definitely priorities for Democrats. These are also rolling back a lot of the Trump administration policies that were put in place. Basically, kind of think of this package as Biden coming in and then undoing and revoking a number of the Trump administration's policies for the last 4 years. So in that way, it's not particularly a broad bipartisan move.
Emily, describe what happens at the Senate today. Mr. McConnell adjourned yesterday. Mr. Schumer comes in. Is it like, the new semester in your grade school where everybody changes desks?
There will be some changing of the desks because of seniority and moving up and whatnot. But the big thing today is that we are going to see those 3 new Democratic senators being sworn in, bringing the Senate to a 50-50 split. And remember, that does give Democrats the majority because they do have Vice President Kamala Harris to break any ties.
Right.
And so we're going to see them sworn in. And we are still waiting on McConnell and Schumer to sort of detail exactly what a 50-50 Senate will look like. They were engaged in negotiations yesterday over exactly how power sharing will work.
Is part of this, Emily, that Vice President Harris will spend a lot of time at the Senate? I mean, is she going to set up court there with being that decisive vote day after day?
Joe Biden doesn't hope so. Joe Biden hopes that he is going to be able to work with McConnell as well as other Republicans, pass things in a bipartisan manner. But look, we've got pretty partisan times right here. If Republicans decide that they don't want to go along with Joe Biden or feel like they can't go along with Biden's agenda, then yeah, I think we're going to see Vice President Harris on the floor of the Senate a great deal in the next 2 years.
Emily, again, there's speculation that Donald Trump could form a new party. What does that mean for the loyalty he gets from members of Congress?
I think there are some members of Congress who come from districts where their constituents are very loyal to Trump, perhaps more loyal to Trump than they are to either given party. But one thing to note here is that, and this would be an entire AP U.S. history lesson, the way that our country is set up, it is very difficult for a third party to emerge and to really gain the sort of political power and political momentum needed in many places. And so while there are a number of individuals out there, voters who feel themselves more loyal to Trump than either party, the logistics of actually getting a third party off the ground might prove particularly difficult for the president.
Emily Wilkins, thank you so much. She will be on the streets of Washington, D.C. Today, this historic day for the nation. Our coverage at 11 a.m. with David Weston. Before that, Alex Steele and Guy Johnson with important conversations. Jason Furman scheduled to join us here in a bit. Later today, the gentle lady from New Jersey, Christine Todd Whitman, in the 1 o'clock hour. Stay with us. This day of inauguration. This is Bloomberg.
continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong, but it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
This is the 1980s all over again, to make sure that we keep our hands firmly on the driving wheel.
I do not see demand coming back to the pre-COVID level anywhere earlier than the end of 2022.
If that happens and we see a demand recovery, then I think the market can absorb it.
I am David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
Give you a sense of the real-time action. The 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Emma Chandra with the Bloomberg Business Flash. Joe Biden will cancel the controversial Keystone XL oil pipeline today, hours after becoming president. That will once again kill a cross-border project that had won a 4-year reprieve under President Trump. The Biden administration says the pipeline does not serve the national interest. Netflix ended the biggest year in company history with a surprise. The world's leading paid streaming service added more customers than expected and says it no longer needs to borrow money to build its entertainment empire. Netflix added 8.5 million new customers in the final 3 months of the year. It now has more than 200 million customers. Shares of Alibaba jumped after co-founder Jack Ma reappeared. Ma hadn't been seen since China's government began clamping down on his business empire almost 3 months ago. He spoke briefly during an annual event he hosts to recognize rural teachers. And that's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom, Francine.
Emma, thanks so much. On a day of politics and the choreography of Washington, there are markets. Let us look at the data right now. Futures up 13. The VIX comes in nicely, a stick, 22.26. Clearly an indication of tone off of the Secretary of Treasury nominee, Chair Yellen. I still call her Chair Yellen. I'm going to embarrass myself with Yellen, Francine. In like 2 years, I'm going to go, Chair Yellen. You know what, Tom? She's going to go, Tom, get your act together. The 10-year yield.
You know what, Tom?
Yeah.
It was quite a surprise, actually, to me. So I listened to her, and first I was quite touched by the fact that, she was doing it from home. But then she started talking about the dollar, right? And something that, the Fed chair. And I had to listen in, and I really listened. I said, wow, this is going to be Yellen actually talking about currency rates. It's going to be a change for us.
You nailed it, Francine. This went through my puny brain yesterday. The idea, do we revert to a Greenspan Fed Treasury relationship where only the Secretary of Treasury talks about currency, and she just, she dials 1-800 Chairman Powell and says, stop talking about foreign exchange. And, we'll see. Well taken. Curve steepening today. A constructive tone to the tape. I mean, come on. On an inauguration day, it's a gift outright. A better market. Francine?
Yeah, a better market. We did also have some encouraging news in terms of earnings, Tom. I know the focus is on the inauguration. There's a lot of talk about, what we saw with Alibaba and certainly on Jack Ma, but European stocks also taking stock, for example, that some of the luxury companies did better than expected in China because they opened up earlier, and the money lost of Chinese travelers abroad is now being spent domestically. Now, coming up on Bloomberg Markets, Ralph Schlossstein, he's Evercore co-chief executive. That's at 10:30 a.m. in New York, 3:30 p.m. in London, and this is Bloomberg.
Y lo más increíble es eso, no solo estás sintiendo frontalmente, sino que en la espalda también, entonces a lo mejor estás jugando y sientes que por detrás te pasa algo, entonces...
Y ver cómo te tiran algún objeto, cómo notas la sensación, ¿no? Como que te golpean a ti. Yo creo que hace que empatices mucho con los personajes y que sea todo mucho más real.
Valuations, particularly, sort of the technology landscape, have gotten to some pretty extraordinary levels. So I think it's not a surprise. I don't think it's any indication of the beginning of the end, but I do think markets don't like uncertainty.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lachman, London, Tom Keene in New York. Now let's talk about the markets. Let's talk about the inauguration and Tom, of course, the stimulus. With us, we're delighted, is John Normand. He's JP Morgan Head of Cross-Asset Fundamentals Strategy. John, thank you for joining us. Inauguration, we have 15 executive orders that Joe Biden will actually sign today. We heard from Janet Yellen yesterday about the stimulus and where it will be spent. Are markets on the right path, or will we see a correction?
I think they're on the right path. I think fiscal policy is turning out to be this gift that keeps on giving. And a lot of people were surprised at how quickly the old Congress agreed a $900 billion spending package at the end of December. And now they're gearing up to deliver something maybe as high as another $2 trillion in the next quarter or so. So I don't think that's fully in the price when you think about how much momentum that's going to lead to the economy and also lend to the earnings cycle. I think it also is going to boost inflation expectations. So even though markets have moved a lot since Biden's election in early November, I still don't think we've seen the fullness of what his administration is going to do for the economy and therefore what it can do for markets.
John, when you look at some of the executive orders, or some actually of what Janet Yellen was talking about, is there a danger that the economy in the U.S. actually heats up, which means that we'll see a normalization of central bank policy before it's expected?
I don't think there's any danger of that over the next 1 year. There may not even be any danger of that over the next couple of years, because even though the U.S. is doing something it hasn't really ever done before, which is keep fiscal policy looser for a couple of years after a recession, there's still slack. And even once that slack gets eroded and essentially the economy could be back at full employment as it was pre-pandemic, the economy really struggled to get inflation to 2% on a core basis, much less get the overshoot. So I think there's both the cyclical issue of slack, which is going to suppress inflation, prevent the overheating in the next couple of years. There's some structural questions that are still unanswered around what causes inflation's movements over the long term. So I think this phobia about destabilizing moves in bond markets is premature. Bond markets can price in a bit of a risk premium for the possibility of that inflation overshoot, but that risk premium means inflation break-evens move up another 25 basis points, and it means nominal yields move up, say, 50 basis points. I don't think it has to be something much more dramatic, because we're still at a very early stage in the business cycle, and therefore an early stage in the inflation cycle.
John Norman, I'm so glad that you mentioned the word slack, the word I most identify with Chair Yellen as she considered the American labor economy. I want to wrap that around a pre-Trumpian Michael Ferroli, who was brilliant on identifying our new trajectory, our new potential GDP. Dovetail the Yellen slack with Ferroli's cautious view of potential GDP.
I think his view on potential GDP is that it's less than 2%. It's maybe 1.75. And if you're going to be running the economy pretty hot for the next year, maybe 5.5% because of these successive rounds of fiscal stimulus, then yes, that slack is going to be eroded because the economy is operating above potential. But I think the point is, what's the gap that needs to be eroded on slack before inflation starts to emerge? And from that perspective, I think the arithmetic would suggest you might have a couple of years to run before that slack is eroded in a way that really talking about full employment. And of course, I think Mike Ferroli, the rest of our U.S. economics team, lots of other economists would tell you that this whole idea of full employment leading to inflation is a pretty fuzzy concept.
Yeah.
That wasn't really the experience of the pre-pandemic era. So I don't think there's a reason to be incredibly bulled up on inflation. You can be a little more positive relative to where inflation is now, but not think that it's going to reach a level in the next couple of years that's disruptive.
Away from your research note, but said with great respect, John Norman, your thoughts on a commodity boom finding escape velocity to higher prices, or are we just buttressed up against that traditional long-term resistance where price gives way and goes down in the coming quarters?
I think this is more or less a pretty ordinary commodity cycle, meaning what's dominating right now is a demand lift for all commodities plus a bit of supply management on the part of OPEC, and that leads to tighter balances in the metals markets, tighter balances in the energy markets. That's pushing prices up, but the degree of price appreciation you're seeing in commodities is not in any way extraordinary. This isn't a cycle that's going to be defined over the next couple of years by a 10% growth rate on Chinese demand or a very metals intensive nature of Chinese consumption. And it's also a cycle which I think eventually is going to be met with some release of spare capacity on the part of OPEC, as well as a restart of shale capacity. So I think that this is a kind of ordinary price cycle, not the kind of stuff we saw before the GFC. You still want to be long commodities. You still want to think they could move 10, 20% in price terms for some of these sectors. But I think expecting a 50% increase in the next year simply because of some repeat of super cycle dynamics, I don't think that really belongs in the baseline for the next 12 months.
John, thank you so much. John Norman there of JP Morgan stays with us. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News. Here's Emma Chandra. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Francine. President-elect Biden plans to immediately begin rolling back some of President Trump's policies today. He has targeted immigration, climate change, and other issues with at least 15 executive actions. They include reversing the U.S. withdrawals from the Paris Agreement and the World Health Organization. He'll also stop construction of the border wall and revoke a permit for the controversial Keystone XL pipeline. Joe Biden's cabinet picks are signaling that the new administration will maintain President Trump's tough line toward China. Officials are vowing to fight what they called abusive trade practices. Plus, they said they would bar products from the Chinese region home to ethnic Uyghur Muslims. Beijing has been accused of genocide involving the Uyghurs. President Trump has pardoned his former strategist, Steve Bannon. Bannon's been charged with defrauding thousands of investors who believed their money would go to build a wall along the southern border of the U.S. Prosecutors say he diverted $1 million of the fund. The president also pardoned and commuted the sentences of dozens of others, including rapper Lil Wayne, and pleaded guilty to a federal gun charge last year. President Trump reportedly has discussed starting a new political party. According to Dow Jones, he'd like to call it the Patriot Party. In recent days, the president has feuded with several Republican leaders. Polls show that he retains strong support among rank-and-file Republicans. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Emma Chandra. This is Bloomberg. Francine, Tom.
Emma, thank you so much. Again, futures up 13, Dow futures up 68. Well, many good conversations through the day here. David Weston providing perspective with the former Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker, the lady from Chicago. We'll speak to Mr. Weston of the nuances of a Biden administration versus her Obama administration. John Norman will return. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Surveillance. Good morning, everyone, from London, from New York, this day of inauguration. We look now at the markets. We'll have lots on politics coming up. John Norman continues with us with J.P. Morgan. John, your dollar call. It's been a surprise, a certitude of weak dollar, and then an ebb and a pause. I've got 14 views. Give me a 15th.
I think I'm going to give you one you probably already heard, which is that it's going to be going down in trade-weighted terms. It's going to be a small move, 3 or 4% trade-weighted over the next year. I'm not feeling very challenged by the move up in bond yields in the U.S., mainly because I think that's a long-end phenomenon. The short end, which is the cash rate, is going to stay at zero for a couple of years. And it's that short rate that drives the carry trade and the hedging decisions. And I think of those as being favored towards non-dollar currencies because of rate differentials. I also think you're going to have a current account that widens on the back of a fiscal loosening in the U.S. relative to fiscal policy in other countries. So, yes, there is $1 positive force, which is a rise in long-end yield. yields. I think that is drawing in central bank related flows. But I think the private investors are really going to be much more driven by the funding rates, and the funding rates I think of as negative for the dollar over the next year.
Identify the current account demands of a new Biden administration, China with buoyant GDP as well. What is the John Norman first order condition for Secretary of State Blinken and the rest on trade?
So I think the trade agenda is going to be to continue putting pressure on China, first of all, to deliver on the phase one agreement, second of all, to deliver on a liberalization agenda that I think the Biden administration favors as much as the Trump administration did. The difference, of course, is going to be tactics and also timeline. The Biden administration is going to be more methodical and longer term in its thinking than the Trump administration. I think you just have less chance of impulsive moves by the Biden administration driving destabilizing moves in currencies. So even though I think the Biden administration is going to press a lot of the same agenda items that have been inherited from Trump, I'm not sure these are going to be market moving events. I think for them to be market moving, there needs to be a kind of revival of the sanctions approach, and that isn't the kind of strategy that these new cabinet officials are going to be pursuing.
John, when you look at different asset classes, where do you see the most returns? So if you look at commodities, credit, or, I don't know, let's say FX.
Well, for me, it's still equities and commodities. I think of these as being the sectors that are traditionally incredibly leveraged to a business cycle upturn, and they're also the sectors that are a little more desensitized to the rise in interest rates. There are other markets that tend to go up, give you positive returns when rates go up. This is credit markets because the spreads tighten, but because the starting yield on those credit markets is near an all-time low, you can have this odd development where spreads tighten and yet the total returns on those asset classes is negative or barely above zero. That would be extremely unusual in a very young but strong business cycle. But it also means that for clients who are looking for cyclical assets, you really need to focus on those things that are a little more detached from the rate market damage, and that's commodities and that's equities. It's not the credit markets, and it's not really the EM complex to the extent that we might hope for. I still think EM is a positive return asset class on the fixed income side. I just think that the returns are going to be kind of low single digits, mainly because of this backup in treasury yields.
John Norman, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it with JP Morgan today. Really important comments there in this great debate of interest rates. Coming up, Joseph Krogan, working with President Trump, the former assistant to the president, director of domestic policy at Council. Joseph Krogan on the changing of the guard in Washington. Stay with us. David Weston at 11 a.m.
has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
We explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
My fellow countrymen,
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, Lyndon Baines Johnson, do solemnly swear.
let us encourage individuals at home and nations abroad to do more for themselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution.
The President is neither prince nor pope, and I don't seek a window on men's souls. In fact, I yearn for a greater tolerance.
My fellow citizens, today we celebrate the mystery of American renewal.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear. That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
That I will execute
Faithfully the office of President of the United States.
President of the United States faithfully. So help me God.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
Just a superb set of voices there across the decades. Thank you to Sarah Rappaport so much for a lot of work to put that together with a nice pace. Someone who understands the pace of the changing of the guard in Washington is Joseph Grogan. This is an important conversation because this is someone in the trenches of policy actually getting things done away from the pomp and circumstance. Joe Grogan, before we go to your wheelhouse of medicine and what Dr. Fauci is going to do to assist the new president, I must ask you, with your knowledge of the administration, the positioning of Vice President Pence in the last number of days. What have you observed from the vice president as he looks forward?
I think he displayed a lot of leadership, calm, bipartisanship, and he stood up as somebody who's devoted his life to public service and really tried to encourage the American people that things are going to be okay. I thought he demonstrated a great deal of courage, and a couple weeks ago on the Mall, and before the mob attacked the Capitol and standing up for the Constitution.
Ladies and gentlemen, anybody who wants to buy Japanese yen, it's time. I'm placing an buy at 103.78. Okay, order place to buy Japanese yen.
It was a great display of calm demeanor and simply doing his job.
Joe Grogan, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, tweeting out the Archbishop of Canterbury getting vaccinated yesterday. We've still got the celebrities mentioning the message and all that. What is your to-do list to jumpstart vaccination? What can be the distinction Dr. Fauci and people like you can bring to make a success for President Biden?
Well, I think, it's interesting that Biden is bringing in Andy Slavitt, who had worked in the Obama administration to turn around the healthcare.gov debacle. Andy was not looking to come back into government service. He had just moved, actually, and was looking to live outside of Washington, D.C. He's more of a fix-it guy than he is an ideologue, although I do disagree with him philosophically. I think it's a good sign they're going to be looking at things differently. And the number one thing that they should be doing is getting more vaccine into the commercial channel and forgetting about all this central planning. There is a need for government to get involved in reaching people who are disconnected from the medical system. But we get people vaccinated all the time in this country as a matter of course for measles, mumps, rubella. There's no reason why we shouldn't be using this normal channel that we use for the vast majority of this, and then supplementing it with Public Health Service Corps. I'm very skeptical of the deployment of the National Guard as a solution. For the inner cities and rural areas where it's going to be difficult to reach people, because I think it's going to breed skepticism. There could be a role for them in some of the mass vaccination sites, but in many instances, the pharmacist is your number one healthcare provider you see more than anybody else. And I think they're more likely to be trusted than somebody showing up in camouflage with a needle.
But Joseph Grogan, so what's the biggest concern,
Okay, guys, that's it. Position opened for Japanese yen at 103.78.
Storage all the time, and the government has dumped a bunch of money into this system. And McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal, they move things all the time. Now McKesson, those are the big three pharmaceutical distributors. Now McKesson is the primary vendor for the current vaccine, but they're taking orders directly from the government on how to do this. They should bring those guys in and say, what would you do now? And put on the table, hey, if we sold you, how many doses would you buy from us and get people vaccinated? I personally am fortunate enough, I would pay for the vaccine for myself and my family. Now, it may not be that I'm in the preferred priority group that CDC wants, but so what, to be honest with you? We're in a race against time. And it may be we have to get, to 100 million people quickly. I think it's within reach. But then beyond that, it's going to be even more difficult. And I don't think it's a either or, just the priority groups versus the non-priority groups. We should be using our strength in this country, which is our commercial channel, to get vaccines out. And I'm optimistic that the Biden team will take a fresh look at this and make some rational decisions. I think I'm actually very encouraged where they have some of the decisions they've made on their staffing in the life sciences generally and healthcare in the last couple of weeks, as opposed to their original choices. So I do think things are looking up for those of us who want to see Biden.
I mean, what you've just said, Joseph, will be quite controversial, certainly in the way that the UK authorities look at it. It's you have to protect, first of all, the more vulnerable. Are there enough doses in the US?
Well, there should be. I mean, all these manufacturers continue to ramp up. I'm hopeful we'll get a Johnson & Johnson vaccine approved very quickly. AstraZeneca's vaccine has a role in a lot of this. The point is not that we shouldn't get the most vulnerable vaccinated. The point is that a shot in the arm is more valuable than a shot that is sitting in a refrigerator, or worse, gets spoiled. So, trying to push everything through a narrow tube is not getting the job done. There are other avenues to get more vaccine flowing, and I do believe there's enough. I mean, they had purchased enough for a specific target at the end of the year, and they didn't hit it. So there is surplus out there. It's just not in the right places, and it's not getting into syringes and into arms.
Joe Grogan, thank you. A terrific brief. Greatly appreciated. Joe Grogan, thank you for your public service, a former director of White House Domestic Policy Council and at USC as well. Francine, there it is, sterling out to 2018 levels, continued sterling strength.
Yeah, and Tom, this is on a number of levels. So first of all, the vaccine inoculation process at the moment, I have to say, is working better in the UK than other countries in Europe. France could catch up, but for the moment it's quite behind. So partly it's that, partly it's also in the supply chains because of Brexit. But we also heard from the Bank of England in terms of inflation. I think we had some inflation numbers, and they weren't nearly as high as they could have been, and that has implications, of course, for future monetary policy as well, Tom.
Well, it's miles away from the gloom of a 120. Remember 120, 122? World's coming to an end. We put on 17 big figures on pound sterling as well. I think that's really of an important note. Futures up 15, Dow futures up 73. We are in a stick on the VIX, 22.16. Can President Biden, on his day of inauguration, can he see a 19 VIX? Well, that would be a big move, actually, based on what we've got right now. But nevertheless, a buoyant market to greet Mr. Biden this morning, 1.10 on the 10-year yield. Oil, 56.34 on Brent crude. Oil, up gold, rather, up $13. Francine and I remiss. Bitcoin crushed 34,800. We will not be talking Bitcoin with Jason Furman of Harvard. Act 10 with Jason Furman, looking forward to doing that. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
This morning, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. will faithfully execute the office of president. He will, to the best of my ability, preserve and protect. He is protected by 25,000 National Guard. This with 400,000 dead within a pandemic. This without the grace of attendance of the previous president. From McConnell to Schumer in a 50-50 Senate, Durbin of Illinois looks for a, quote, level of cooperation. And markets guesstimate the magnitude of stimulus, the magnitude of our inequality, the magnitude of unity. Good morning, everyone. From London, from New York, Francine Lacroix and Tom Keene to begin our inauguration coverage. We welcome all of you worldwide in the darkness of the early morn of Washington, D.C. Francine, it is a uniquely different inauguration.
It is certainly uniquely different. Of course, all eyes on what Joe Biden will do and say. Some 25,000 troops will guard the inauguration ceremony after these deadly riots at the Capitol earlier this month. We know that Donald Trump will also leave the White House for the last time, bound for Florida in a couple of hours. And of course, ahead of the inauguration, Joe Biden also set out about an hour ago, or, we found out about an hour ago that he set out 15 executive actions, Tom, that he would take immediately covering climate, equality, immigration, and coronavirus.
Well, those executive actions coming as we believe President Trump to move to Andrews Air Force Base, this in the early morning, maybe 8 o'clock, and then on to Florida as well. With a morning briefing, our first for news in London, here's Emma Chandra.
Tom, as you've been discussing, President-elect Biden plans to immediately begin rolling back some of President Trump's policies today. He has targeted immigration, climate change, and other issues with at least 15 executive actions. They include reversing the U.S. withdrawals from the Paris Agreement and the World Health Organization. He'll also stop construction of the border wall and revoke a permit for the controversial Keystone XL pipeline. Last-minute pardons and commutations from the White House. Last night, President Trump pardoned his former strategist, Steve Bannon. Bannon's accused of defrauding investors who donated money to help build a wall along the border with Mexico. The president also pardoned rapper Lil Wayne and former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. It's a sobering milestone. The U.S. has now seen more than 400,000 deaths as a result of the coronavirus. There's also been 24 million infections. That makes the U.S. the global leader in both categories. Incoming President Joe Biden has vowed to speed up the vaccination process. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo needs a nice chunk of that stimulus proposal that President-elect Biden is pushing. Cuomo warned of tax hikes on the wealthy and cuts to schools if he can't get $15 billion in aid. He says he'll sue the federal government if New York doesn't get what he calls its fair share. Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Emma Chandra. This is Bloomberg. Francine, Tom.
Emma, thanks so much. Equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, lifted in green on the screen. Futures up 17 and a stick on the VIX, 22.12 is important on the VIX. I'll let Francine talk about 137 sterling. Yields fractionally higher. It is risk on this day of inauguration. Francine?
Yeah, so first of all, we did hear from the Bank of England's chief economist, Tom, saying that the government can afford to end its furlough plan before the UK's recovery is fully complete. We do look at pound with a bit of movement, not only because of the supply chain and Brexit, but certainly UK inflation up with real yields actually dropping to minus 0.4%. Consumer prices rising 0.6% year on year. That's a bit better than expected in the UK, so that may be also one of the dynamics looking at sterling. Overall, though, I'm looking at better markets because of earnings and also it's inauguration day. A lot of expectations of stimulus, Tom.
On this day of inauguration, let us listen to two presidents.
This week, we inaugurate a new administration and pray for its success in keeping America safe and prosperous. We extend our best wishes, and we also want them to have luck.
It's deeply personal that our next journey to Washington starts here, a place that defines the very best of who we are as Americans. I know these are dark times, but there's always light.
Through James Earl Carter, the inauguration was on the east side of the Capitol. That's a side away from the mall towards the Library of Congress and, of course, off in the distance, the Supreme Court. And then it flipped over to the west side of the Capitol. Of course, the images that we saw on January 6th forever changing our perception of that west side. Our Kevin Cirilli looks over the marble deck of 1870, Olmsted's marble deck, looking out on the mall. Kevin, what will you observe today at 12 noon?
President-elect Joe Biden in just a couple of hours set to deliver his inauguration address behind me, and he will do so at a time in which the economy is really stagnating, as well as the COVID-19 vaccination rollout, he argues, has been botched. So he is really going to have his opportunity to deliver a message to try to put on a two-track system to get the economy back, as well as to get the vaccination rollouts out front. But no question, the magnitude of this moment, when, as you just alluded to, just more than a week ago, the scene right here behind me was quite different than the patriotic imagery that we're seeing this morning. And so as a result of that, this has been a much different type of inauguration than President-elect Biden had thought that he would be receiving.
How will Vice President Pence be received by the victorious Democrats?
Well, look, I think that there are still some areas of bipartisanship during this inaugural ceremony. We should note that President-elect Biden will attend Mass with congressional leadership at St. Matthew's Church later this morning. He will do so with current Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He invited those both Republican and Democratic leaders to attend Mass ceremonies with him. But you're absolutely correct. President Trump's not attending this inauguration is going to be a glaring sign of omission. But there will also be other opportunities when the leadership of President-elect Biden and Vice President Pence, as well as other Republican and Democratic leaders, stop at the tomb of the unknown soldier. President Trump will not be there. And so the imagery of this is going to be an historic moment, but also a glaring hole of omission on behalf of President Trump.
Kevin, we heard from Joe Biden that he will swiftly unwind some of the Trump policies put in place through executive orders. What does what does it tell us about, A, the priorities, but also how quickly Joe Biden wants to move?
It's not unusual for a president in their first day to issue swift executive orders. It is unusual in terms of the pandemic that America finds itself in, as well as other countries all around the world. We should also note that the President-elect Biden and his administration have forecasted that they will not be taking swift action as it relates to U.S. and China relationship, especially in terms of the economic tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed. I mention that because there is a long to-do list, a progressive wish list, so to speak, that Democrats would like to see accomplished quickly and swiftly, but that's just not going to happen. And so the Biden administration and the sources that I've talked with on the transition team have told me that they are taking a much more pragmatic approach, but making sure that the vaccination rollout as well as an economic stimulus are the top two priorities on their agenda.
Kevin, apart from, of course, the actual swearing in, which is at 12 p.m. D.C. time, what else are you watching out for in this inauguration?
Well, I mean, there is going to be some music. Lady Gaga will perform the national anthem. But I think beyond that, just the security presence in this city is unlike anything that I've ever seen in my nearly 10 years covering Washington. There's more security here than when the Pope spoke at Congress. It's really remarkable. And typically, and Tom, you know this, typically the podium behind me, it overlooks the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, and there's a long reflection pool. Typically, that's where thousands of people would be gathered. But right now, there are just flags honoring the Americans who have lost their lives to COVID-19. It's a really somber image. And yesterday, we saw President-elect Biden, as well as Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who is breaking a significant historic barrier, and she will be inaugurated as the vice president. We saw them stop by the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with their respective spouses to pay their respects to the 400,000 Americans who have lost their lives to the pandemic.
Kevin, we move from Kennedy to Biden. It is remarkable, folks, how in 2021 we do not have a discussion of the Catholic faith like this nation did in 1960. Kevin, paint the picture of St. Matthew's Church. Cardinal Cushing was there for the assassination. Paint the symbolism of what Biden is doing right now versus what we observe from the present president at the Yellow Church across from the Hay Adams Hotel in Lafayette Park.
When you go into St. Matthew's, you are greeted with a large dome and a really beautiful church. And it is, as you just pointed out, where President John F. Kennedy was laid to rest, and it is marked in that church. It is a Catholic mainstay in Washington, D.C., where Supreme Court justices attend, and is really where a lot of Washington individuals attend Mass of all different political stripes. It's different than the National Cathedral on the other side of town.
Yes.
I say this because at a moment in which Leader McConnell yesterday spoke on the Senate floor, at a time in which there was again that attack on the Capitol just more than a week ago, and he placed blame on President Trump, the outgoing administration, this is a remarkable images, mind you, of bipartisanship that have largely eclipsed American politics in the last 5 to 6 years, and perhaps a display of defiant hope, to be candid, that perhaps bipartisanship at least can return in matters bigger than the partisan bickering. Now, I say this with clear eyes. Let's make no mistake. The $1.9 trillion proposal that the Biden administration has proposed is going to face significant Republican backlash, but maybe in a different tone.
Kevin Cerulli, thank you so much from the west front of the Capitol today. Our coverage continuing through the morning. Alex Steele, I know, has some good conversation set up in the 10 o'clock hour, and then on to David Weston in our coverage at 11 a.m. I believe the swearing in the vicinity of 12 noon. We will have perspective from the Connecticut governor, and that would be Ned Lamont, and also really thrilled that Ray Kelly will join us. Obviously, New York former police commissioner. That is a good thing. Please stay with us with futures up 17. This is Bloomberg.
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
Surveillance. Good morning, everyone, from London, from New York, on this day of inauguration. Francine Lacroix and Tom Keene. We're going back and forth. Great conversation there with Kevin Cerulli, I thought, from the west front of the Capitol. And, of course, he'll be there through the morning. Right now, we will look at something, well, more of a bull market with futures up 17. We look at the equity markets and do that with Gina Martin Adams of Bloomberg Intelligence. How about a single best chart, folks? 4 stocks. This one doesn't, what do they say on the Muppets? This one doesn't look like the other ones or whatever it is. JP Morgan straight up. Wells Fargo with a pulse, and the rest just underperforming going back to 2007. Gina Martin Adams, I don't want you to give me buy, hold, sell on the banks, but I do want you to talk forward with your courage to be in the market about stock selection. Should we bank on stock selection, or is a more passive, blended, diversified path better for this year?
Well, it depends on what sectors you're in. There are sectors where stock selection is absolutely worthwhile. They tend to be telecom, consumer discretionary, technology, where there are other sectors that are have much more concentrated gains. Less diversification actually works in your favor because they tend to move around with the macro. This is groups like financials, energy, utilities, where you tend to just see bulky moves drive the entire sector at once. You know, obviously your chart on banks there shows that there has been one single large winner in the bank space. I think that that is specifically because of a flight to quality in banks in an environment of extraordinarily low interest rates. There's a lot of fear still that the financial sector is under distress as a result of potential bankruptcies coming out of the energy space. Right. There's also just a lot of uncertainty with respect to whether or not the yield curve can become more upward sloping. So there is this flight to quality into a single name that is viewed as the dominant company in that space. That said, overall financials, you're not going to get as much benefit of single name selection as you are in some of the other sectors historically.
Gina, when I look at the stock market, I look at what Bloomberg Intelligence does, and it's a huge compendium of earnings dynamics. How have you tweaked your earnings view in the last few weeks?
So interestingly, we haven't really tweaked our earnings view very much, at least from my perspective, where I run a macro model for what do I expect from earnings results over the course of 2021. Not a lot has changed. What we use is forward-looking estimates for where we think economic growth is going to go. I do think if we do get a near $2 trillion spending package passed out of the first 100 days of the new Biden administration, we will most likely have to increase our macroeconomic estimates to suggest that we could get closer to 20% growth in EPS in 2021. So we could have much stronger growth as a result of simply more stimulus coming down the pike. In terms of analyst expectations, most of the changes over the course of the last 2 weeks have really come out of the financial sector, and that's as a result more of fourth quarter beats than anything else. I mean, the financial space has had an extraordinary beat to expectations for fourth quarter. Originally, we were expecting a 20% drop in earnings for that segment. We're now on pace for a 5% gain. That alone has resulted in an upward adjustment to S&P 500 fourth quarter. What's most interesting about this to me is that that is not resulting in any change to 2021. So analysts are saying, once again, this happened to us in the second quarter and the third quarter as well. Great. We've had much better than expected performance, but there's a tremendous amount of skepticism as to whether or not that's actually going to follow through to elevate earnings growth in the year ahead. We think it will, but analysts are still holding the line on their expectations for 2021, only incrementally increasing them for really more than 6 months.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Gina, talk to me about zombie companies. How should we look at the potential for zombie companies actually infecting the system?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because this was something we talked about a lot in 2009, 2010 as well. I mean, recall we had giant bailouts in that great financial crisis. The result was government takeovers of some companies, which then were reissued as public from public to private entities. We've got something very similar on our hands today, where we have government direct funding supporting a large swath of companies in the index. I would say the space where we want to be most careful is probably still energy. When we look at the energy sector, a third of that sector still does not meet the market cap threshold requirements for inclusion into the S&P 500, and they're still sitting in the S&P 500. So the committee has been really slow to kick some of these companies out. Bankruptcy risks has certainly been minimized. It's not that these companies are necessarily going to go bankrupt, but they are being tremendously supported by government funding, by extremely low credit spreads. You see something very similar in the airline industry, which is obviously somewhat reliant upon continuous payments from the government in order to remain afloat. It's going to remain a problem, without a doubt, for the next year or so. The real question becomes, how fast can we grow coming out of this? And when we grow, who will be the net beneficiaries of that growth? And for energy, a lot of that's going to depend on the price of the underlying commodity. For airlines, it'll depend more on economic activity and how robust activity gets.
Thank you so much, Gina Martin-Adams, there, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Equity Strategist. Now, coming up on Bloomberg Markets, Ralph Schlosstein. He is Evercore Co-Chief Executive. That interview at 10:30 a.m. in New York, 3:30 p.m. in London, and this is Bloomberg.
我开始做直播是在今年年初的时候，就主要是去年的话，我们参加更多的是线下的活动。今年大家都知道，由于中国的这个疫情，导致这些线下活动不能办了，所以更多的交流方式在线上。就今年春节之后，主要是开始在线上通过直播的方式跟粉丝进行交流。直播可能对于投资者来说是陪伴投资者，大家讲讲市场啊，讲讲投资的心理啊，这样的话就可以让大家在投资的时候，心情更平缓。平缓的话，可能做到长期持有；长期持有的话，才可能赚钱。相对而言，线上可能覆盖的人群更多，因为可能疫情很多人在家里看直播的人更多。反而可能，我这个工作可能是反而是受益于疫情的一个工作吧。
明天希望高开赚钱，
祝大家赚大钱。
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment. The politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Emma Chandra with the Bloomberg Business Flash. Netflix ended the biggest year in company history with a surprise. The world's leading paid streaming service added more customers than expected and says it no longer needs to borrow money to build its entertainment empire. Netflix added 8.5 million new customers in the final 3 months of the year. It now has more than 200 million customers. Shares of Alibaba jumped after co-founder Jack Ma reappeared. Ma hadn't been seen since China's government began clamping down on his business empire almost 3 months ago. He spoke briefly during an annual event he hosts to recognize rural teachers. A big pay cut for Disney executive chairman Bob Iger. It was slashed 56% to $21 million last year. The world's largest entertainment company curtailed bonuses and other compensation in the wake of the pandemic. And that's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom Francine.
Emma, thank you so much. Now, the picture, of course, on the markets is one of gains, partly due to the earnings, Tom, that we saw in Europe and in Asia, partly due to the fact that it's inauguration day. And I guess there's maybe a little bit of legacy on the stimulus and the fact that we could see more fixing of the health crisis in the U.S., which could in turn lead to a higher economy. Now, this is what we're looking at. It's a day after Janet Yellen unveiled this $1.9 trillion COVID relief proposal to lawmakers, of course, and really European stocks are tracking U.S. equity futures higher. And then I wanted to show you a pound. I don't have it here in my data check, Tom, but it does have to do with inflation forecast, and also real yield in the UK.
137 print there on pound sterling right now, 136.95. What would I look at? Well, I got futures up 15 and Dow futures up 71. I think of great note, folks, looking out over Tuesday, Wednesday here in America and on through the week. The VIX setting up for this inauguration, 22.21 in a full stick right now as well. This will be a wonderful conversation. I should point out Netflix and Alibaba up nicely. Netflix just killing it. Is I spent too much time trying to relearn my lousy chess game. Jason Furman will join us. This is an important conversation on the reality of policy and how it is applied across our new inequalities. Jason Furman of Harvard, thrilled that he could join us on this day. Please stay with us again. David Weston with our coverage beginning at 11 a.m., the swearing in of the new president. Look for that at 12 noon. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Okay, guys, I'm going to play stop on profit for Japanese yen. So all of you who follow my trades and placed an order and executed this order at 103.78, you need to place stop on profit at 103.80. Okay? And let's just check it out, basically, how much broker gives you per pip. This will be your profit. No matter what's going to happen, you will not lose this trade. Okay, this is what it's all about, day trading. We try to make lots of money by trading frequently. Yeah, several trades a day. It will be enough money to put butter and bread on the table. Okay, speak to you later, guys.
Their CPG history, their experience, and really how we might be able to combine together to really create this fantastic public company. And so we kind of got into the SPAC thing a little bit before it became such a hot method of going public.
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
Over the next few months, we're going to need more aid. Neither the president-elect nor I proposed this relief package without an appreciation for the country's debt burden. But right now, with interest rates at historic lows, the smartest thing we can do is act big. In the long run, I believe the benefits will far outweigh the costs. The United States does not seek a weaker currency to gain competitive advantage, and we should oppose attempts by other countries to do so. We need to take on China's abusive, unfair, and illegal practices.
Chair Yellen, and she will always be Chair Yellen, is our newly minted U.S. Treasury Secretary, the nominee, of course, right now, Janet Yellen. Francine Lacroix and Tom Keene on this day of inauguration, and I will not mince words. This is the interview I've most looked forward to today. Jason Furman is at Harvard and is exceptionally acute on the application of policy. He's a former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors and knows of unity and knows of our growing inequalities nationwide. Professor Furman, good morning to you. I would like to go to John F. Kennedy and take it out of context, but let us never fear to negotiate. What will the new negotiation on policy be in Washington?
Well, Tom, a big question will be, does President Biden go through regular order, which would require 60 votes in the Senate? That would require 10 Republicans. Or does he use a procedure called reconciliation, go with 50 votes? And the first test is he put out a $1.9 trillion plan. He could do a decent amount of that with just Democrats. Does he bring Republicans along and shrink the package? I think at the end of the day, the Republican price will be too high, and he's going to do what he needs to, which is to go ahead with Democrats to get it done.
Have you calculated the amount of $1.9 trillion and, quite frankly, the infrastructure bill to follow that can be rammed through, Byrd Amendment and all, with reconciliation, a modern tool?
Yeah, I mean, even to get 50 Democrats on board, my guess is that number has to come down. And for some of it to be better targeted, like the $1,400 checks, I think that would be perfectly fine and be an improvement on the legislation that was put forward. Broadly speaking, if you look at it, it's a lot of money per month in 2021. If that came down a little bit, but then it extended out as needed, if the economy still had difficulties, that it was still there in 2022, that's what I would do to modify it.
Jason, what is the one thing that actually will change the trajectory of the U.S. economy right now? Is it the health crisis and the fact that maybe we get ahead of it with vaccinations, or is it the stimulus plan?
Well, Francine, I teach introductory economics, and we learn about supply and demand, and I think both supply and demand matter. To use a metaphor, to open up the restaurants, we need vaccines, and on the way there, we need testing. That's the supply side of the economy. But an open restaurant isn't enough. You need to be able to afford to go have meals in those restaurants. That's where demand comes in. That's where support for the unemployed and others is so important as well.
Can you bridge that divide, that Republican-Democrat divide, or Trump's base and everyone else divide, by growing? And at the moment, are there the right economic things in place to make sure that people that felt left out actually feel part of this new economy?
I think this is going to be an excellent year for growth. I don't know if it'll be good enough to get us all the way back to where we want to be at the end of the year. I think probably not. But it'll be an excellent year for growth. And I think that hopefully will help bring people together. I went through the last financial crisis. It just got worse and worse and worse before it got better. And that led to the Tea Party. That led to a lot of discontent. I think this time maybe success begets more success, and that's the dynamic I hope we see in 2021.
Jason, Ronald Reagan, and I was really struck by the directness of his inaugural speech. Ronald Reagan said government is not the solution. Through pandemic, through the last 4 years, do you see a shift in conservative America away from the reticence that President Reagan identified with to let Washington fix it?
Among probably most conservatives, there's always been an overall ideological belief that government isn't the answer. But then if there's, a natural disaster, if your parents need health care, if something happens, then you call on the government. And so I think that cognitive dissonance, or maybe it's a principled set of exceptions, is longstanding, and that's what we're seeing now. So I don't think it's an ideological shift so much as a pragmatism or willingness to make exceptions.
I want you to state now, I want you to pretend you're talking to Ec 10 right now, and I want you to address the 14 people in your class with their hands up saying, look at all this debt, look at all this growth of debt, someday we will pay a price. How do you answer that question?
I answer that question by saying, you don't need to pay the debt off in a single year. You can stabilize it over time. In order to see that, let's look at interest. Interest rates are historically low right now. They're likely to rise, but not back to where they were 20 or 30 years ago. That gives us a lot more room to run debt. And in fact, our debt service costs are historically low right now and suggest we have a lot of fiscal space if we use it wisely.
Jason, there's quite a lot of talk, of course, about what happened in the U.S. economy over the last 10 years, which is debt goes up, but if you look at the Gini coefficient, so has inequality. Do you worry that there's a connection and that by just creating more debt, inequality will also rise?
No, I mean, Francine, it depends on what you do with the debt. If you accumulate debt to give tax cuts to high-income households, that'll raise inequality. If you accumulate debt to give $3,000 to every child as part of a plan to cut child poverty nearly in half, something that's in the relief bill, then inequality goes down. And finally, you talked about a decade. The last 5 years, we've seen a reduction prior to the pandemic in wage inequality. And that was in part because of the hot economy we ran. And if the debt is in service of a hot economy, it will reduce wage inequality.
How would you actually reduce inequality now?
I think a moderate and phased-in increase in the minimum wage would be a good idea. I'm not sure I'd go to $15 an hour in 5 years, but something a little bit more modest than that. Investing in education matters over the long run. Running as hot an economy as you can, consistent with inflation. And then finally, a more progressive system, especially that invests in children.
Jason Furman, I know it's day one, so it's difficult, I guess, to get a real feeling of exactly what will happen next. We've also had, 15 executive orders that should be signed today, which is a hugely swift move to try and undo some of the things that President Trump had put in place. But do you think that actually the Biden administration now will reach across the aisle to get a lot of stuff done?
I think he's going to try to reach across the aisle. It's tough in our country. Things are very polarized right now. He has a good relationship with Mitch McConnell. I've been in the room with the two of them as they negotiated, but they both represent, different sets of interests, different sets of concerns. What I think both of them can do is sort of fight and have a conflict in one space and then cooperate as needed in another. Neither one, holds grudges, and they're both adults about it. So I think we'll see a combination of conflict and cooperation with the president and the Republicans in the legislature.
Jason Furman, thank you so much for the time today. A former chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors and at Harvard. Much more to come here, folks. Futures up 14, Dow futures up 54. David Weston, as he begins his coverage at 11 a.m. in conversation with a Democrat from Chicago. No, not that Democrat from Chicago, the other one. Penny Pritzker joins, a former Secretary of Commerce. Again, futures up 14. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
China continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong, but it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
Founder, this is Bloomberg.
My fellow countrymen,
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, Lyndon Baines Johnson, do solemnly swear.
let us encourage individuals at home and nations abroad to do more for themselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution.
The President is neither prince nor pope, and I don't seek a window on men's souls. In fact, I yearn for a greater tolerance.
My fellow citizens, today we celebrate the mystery of American renewal.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
That I will execute
faithfully the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States faithfully. So help me God.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
There's terrific perspective there from before World War II. Thanks to our Sarah Rappaport for a lot of work to find those important moments in our nation's history. We welcome all of you to Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, Francine Lacroix and Tom Keene. And now we go to where Pennsylvania Avenue turns. East of the White House, there's an abrupt right turn and down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. And I would suggest maybe a Pennsylvania Avenue. And Mr. Biden will not walk up today. Emily Wilkins is there, and she joins us now. Emily, let's start with that. There is a tradition. Will President Biden and Mrs. Biden walk up Pennsylvania Avenue at any point today?
You know, they're not going to have the big inaugural parade that we're used to seeing from other presidents and other inaugurations. Instead, the newly sworn in President Biden will be headed off to Arlington Cemetery to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. From there, he will return to the White House, where his staff has informed us that he has a very busy day ahead, signing a number of executive orders.
Well, that is news. Let's cover on that right now. With, you know, the normal switching in pandemic care and that, the White House is ready to greet the Biden family?
The White House is prepared and ready to greet the Biden family. Donald Trump is leaving early this morning. He will be boarding a plane to Mar-a-Lago. Then Biden will be getting in. He's got a number of executive orders ready to sign. That includes revoking the permit for the Keystone Pipeline, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, and rejoining the World Health Organization.
Okay, guys, as you can see, we closed Japanese yen at 103.80. So all of you who followed my trades and purchased it at 103.78, you got your stop at 103.80. So you got your profit. Well done. Yeah. I will calculate. I'll show you on the screen how much we made. You can see from on your screen, basically on your trading account. It all depends how much broker gives you per pip. Yeah. So it might be 30 pounds per pip, maybe 100 pounds, maybe 50 pounds. So well done. Anyway, it was profitable trade.
His own political party. We've heard that he potentially has interest in sort of remaining as a political figure, someone who still might have influence. And then there's always the question, will he run again in 2024? Will he be able to run again in 2024? There's a potential that the Senate might block him from doing that, depending how the impeachment trial goes.
Emily, given what we heard from Mitch McConnell yesterday, does it make it more likely that actually he'll work well with Joe Biden?
You know, Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell, remember, these two men served in the Senate for many, many years together. And even though they're not ideological allies, they do have a relationship between them. But I think the key to remember is that we are living in very partisan times right now. We saw yesterday McConnell, as well as Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, really struggle to come up with an agreement on how to govern the Senate in a 50-50 split. So what happens next, it will remains to be seen. There's a potential that they could work something out, but there's also potential that we're going to see some of the stonewalling that we've seen in the last 2 years.
Emily, how much focus will be on Mike Pence today? That's almost fulfilling, you know, the role of Donald Trump in this inauguration in many ways. Is he the natural leader of the Republican Party if Donald Trump cannot run in 2024, or if Donald Trump forms a new party?
I think that remains to be seen. I mean, there are certainly a number of other lawmakers who are trying to step up right now and sort of become sort of within the Trumpian mold, really appeal to his supporters. I think the Republican Party is going to be figuring that out within the next couple of years. Certainly, there are lots of strong individuals within that party who would like to assume a leadership role.
Emily, thanks so much. Emily Wilkins there, of course, outside, well, close to the Capitol there, waiting for that inauguration to start. Now, stay with Bloomberg for our special coverage of Joe Biden's inauguration. Our lineup of guests include Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont and former New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly. That starts 11 a.m. in New York, 4 p.m. in London.
And the Republican Party is going... Certainly, there are lots of strong individuals within that party who would like to assume a leadership role.
Emily, thanks so much. Emily Wilkins there, of course.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market, it's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Francine Lachman, London, Tom Keene in New York. Now, as we continue to track the virus, and of course it's inauguration, so a lot of things could change in the U.S., Bloomberg has developed this unique partnership with the leading authority on COVID-19. Johns Hopkins has been at the forefront of the international response, and every day will bring you insight from experts in public health, infectious disease, and emergency preparedness. Joining us today is Lauren Sauer, Johns Hopkins Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine. Lauren, in a couple of hours, the U.S. will have a new president. How will Joe Biden handle COVID-19 differently?
I think we're going to see a much stronger coordinated federal effort to roll out some of these critical public health efforts that have really fallen to our state and local health officials. And that is going to be a huge change. I mean, I think when President-elect Biden rolled out his plan the other evening in his speech, everyone was excited. We're excited to see that coordinated response from testing to vaccine increases and strategies for supplements as well. All of it will go towards an umbrella response that we haven't really yet seen from the Trump administration.
How much more quickly can vaccines actually get rolled out? Does it need to be at a much more local level? Is it pharmacies, Lauren, or is it troops?
I think there's a lot of looking into what is causing the delays right now, which is really important. There's two sides. There's the distribution side and getting the vaccine into people's arms. And then there is making sure that people are there and willing and ready to receive it. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done still within the community on trusting the vaccine, on being willing to get it. And then we also need to think about how do we safely and effectively give vaccine? We won't immediately have immunity when you get that vaccine. So you need to create a safe space where you can move large numbers of people through a vaccine distribution center. And I think there's a big push by the Biden administration to do this. That first 100 days or where he's really looking to scale up the vaccine response will be huge. So that may mean bringing troops in to support the actual